Today, I'll be doing an objective analysis of The Acolyte, because the discourse around modern Star Wars, and this show specifically, has devolved into such extreme polarization that it's difficult to find a review or analysis that's free from the hyperbolic rage of the content machine. As if you don't already know, The Acolyte is the latest Disney Star Wars project to become a hot-button topic. This one is created by Leslie Headland, a creator of Netflix's original Russian Doll. But this video is not going to be concerned with her, or the highly corrosive conversations that surround Star Wars, or the personal politics of the Walt Disney Corporation or anybody involved. I will be assessing this show based on how, and with what degree of success, the narrative, tonal, and stylistic goals of this story are being met. When I say objective analysis, I mean determining the creator's intent for their work and assessing if their creative choices were successful to that end. This process will entail breaking down each episode of The Acolyte and describing how specific choices accomplish or detract from the intent for the narrative or the characters or the tone, etc. Nobody's powers of observation are perfect, and I welcome you to chip in via the comments if you want to tell me what I missed or maybe misinterpreted. Most of this will be objective and free from emotive language, but I will wrap up each episode with a short review section that expresses my personal feelings about what we watched. These subjective sections will be clearly marked and will be based on the observations from the analysis as well as my own personal tastes and biases. I am not starting out here from a viewpoint that modern Disney Star Wars is awful or amazing, and I will not be tactically omitting details or emphasizing certain elements to support any particular conclusion. I want to observe this show in good faith and as impartially as I can on its own terms. When anybody claims to have an objective take, there will be an attempt to derail it with the sentiment that all art, including film and television, is subjective. So let's be clear here at the beginning. Our enjoyment is subjective. How much or little you personally value a work of art is entirely subject to your taste and experience, which is totally unique to each individual person. Maybe it's a little rich to call Star Wars art, but you know what I mean. An observation-based assessment is not inherently subjective. For example, if I say Hayden Christensen's performance as Anakin Skywalker in this scene after he's killed the Sand People is attempting to communicate his internal suffering and anger through his expressions, body language, and dialogue, now that is an objective statement. If you wanted to argue with me on that, one would have to play a semantics game contesting my phrasing of the analysis and deliberately misunderstand the intent of the scene. But if I were to say Hayden Christensen's acting is objectively good, well, that's not something I can objectively prove, and this could be argued just by disagreeing with it. If I wanted to use the word good or bad in my objective analysis, I would at minimum have to demonstrate an objective standard for technical acting quality, which doesn't really exist. And even then, the word good is not just a description of technical ability, it is also an expression of my personal enjoyment of the performance, and more specifically, the amount of goodness in it. So a word like good can mean many things to many people, and to that end, you will not hear me say things in this video to the tune of such and such character or element is good or bad. So when I make qualitative statements, which I will always provide evidence from the actual show, although you are welcome to disagree with that conclusion. Maybe this is too much intro, and you found this disclaimer to be unnecessary, but this is a really controversial piece, so it feels worthwhile to me to be thorough. And for what it's worth, I actually think Hayden Christensen's acting is really good, especially in the last one. The way that this worked is I wrote the analysis for each of these episodes in real time after seeing these episodes as they aired on Disney+. As such, you might notice that some of my initial impressions of the material are not consistent with how I feel by the end of the show, and even in the analysis, I might end up focusing on elements that don't end up having significant payoff. And that's because I interpreted those elements as being important in the moment as I watched the show. A good example would be like Saul's mind reading ability or how remote Kilnaka's house is, if you've seen the show. These elements are paid a lot of lip service, but I was wrong in focusing on them because they don't actually end up mattering in the story. If you feel that this makes my analysis wrong in some areas, I suppose that's fair, but I took the show as it came to me, and on some points my thinking evolved with the story, or maybe I was out of step with the creator's intent in the moment. Last thing for the intro, if you are actually seeing this video, it means I probably spent the last month or so editing a video out of a script that had ballooned to 60 pages, which is a lot for me, so I would appreciate any feedback you have, good or bad. That's probably enough introduction, so let's begin this objective analysis of The Acolyte. Episode 1, Lost/Found. The show opens with some text and a bar fight. There are several plot threads set up here, mostly in mid-fight dialogue and some pointed shots. Master Indara asks the assassin, "Who trained you?" She also recognizes the assassin, but from where, we don't yet know. The assassin also demonstrates some competency with the Force. Currently limited to her enhanced strength and some Force pushing, there are a number of lines and shots that concern the usage of weapons. A girl who looks nearly identical to the assassin wakes up as if from a frightening dream. She works as a mechanic on a Trade Federation ship. There's a fire on the exterior that appears to remind her of something from her past. A Jedi Knight named Yord shows up to question the assassin, whose name is Osha Anasea. He questions her about the murder of Master Indara, which occurred, according to him, last night. Yord threatens to use the Force on the Nemoidian ship captain in order to extract information about Osha. This moment of coercion could be interpreted as setting up a tone for the Jedi in this show. Yord explains to Osha that Osha was brought up in the Jedi Order after everyone she knew was killed in a fire. Osha insists on her innocence, but is put on a prison transport ship to be taken back to Coruscant. This scene gives us some backstory to Osha and her history with Yord and with the Jedi. It is unclear how Yord found Osha on this ship where she was working illegally. They reveal the bartender as a means of explanation, but it is established that non-droid mechanics are illegal in this universe,
Legislated that only droids may perform outer-ship repair.
and that mechanics bunk ship to ship, so it's a mystery how Yord located Osha on this specific ship in less than a full day. Also, the mechanics are called mechnics, but they don't really elaborate much on what that means, so I'm just going to call them mechanics, because that's functionally what they are. Cut to a building on Coruscant where Jedi Master Sol is teaching younglings to connect with the Force. He tells the younglings that their eyes can deceive them. He knows of Master Indara's murder and is deeply affected to hear that Osha, his former Padawan, is the primary suspect. This scene sets a precedent for the Jedi to have political enemies and that they are not above suppressing information to protect their reputation. This could also be setting up a theme of the show when he tells the younglings that their eyes can deceive them. Osha escapes and crash lands on an ice planet. On Coruscant, Sol begs to be the one that searches for Osha, expressing that he feels responsible for her. Osha wakes up from the crash and begins having visions of a young girl. Osha refers to this girl as May. On Sol's ship, he explains his connection to Osha and that Osha and May were twins before May was killed. Osha runs away through some rocks. She's cornered on a cliff face by the three Jedi. She falls and Sol catches her with the Force. Okay, I kind of have to talk about it. I have to talk about it. Osha's ship crash lands. She gets knocked unconscious. In the time that she is unconscious, the other people that were escaping the prison ship with her get brought back to Coruscant. No idea where in the universe this is all taking place, by the way. Maybe they're right next door. Who knows? They get brought back to Coruscant. They get interrogated by Sol. Sol has a conversation with Minestra. Sol decides to be the one that's going to go rescue Osha. Sol, Yord, and Jecki all go looking for Osha and arrive at the ice planet in the time that Osha was unconscious. So either Osha was unconscious for like days and days, or the editing here makes the chronology very mismatched. A sinister voiceover tells us that the Jedi cannot be harmed without weapons, but an unarmed acolyte, quote, kills without a weapon, unquote, and is able to kill the dream shared by the Jedi. This line seems to be suggesting that the Jedi live by a strict rules of engagement that can be circumvented by an unarmed opponent. The voice is emanating from a character dressed in black who draws a red lightsaber, and the episode ends. Also, Osha's not the assassin, May's the assassin. They just look exactly the same. Notable in this first episode is that it's mostly set up for the rest of the season. Mysteries are hinted at with the possible Sith character and their mission to kill a Jedi without a weapon. We get some hints about Osha's backstory, which is suggested to be traumatic and involving a fire that wiped out her family. There are some themes set up here of corruption in the Jedi Order that are present in Sol's conversation with Master Vernestra and in May's accusations in the opening fight scene. The writing in this episode doubles down on exposition, explaining several details multiple times. Osha's family being killed in a fire is a fact told to Osha by Yord, which is redundant because the character surely knows this about herself. There is a fellow Jedi present in this scene, but Yord is addressing Osha directly, not acknowledging his Padawan. Osha's backstory is explained again by Sol to Jeki Lon on top of the dream flashback of the burning forest and Osha's trauma vision. So the narrative is giving multiple opportunities for the audience to understand some of Osha and May's backstory, with 2 scenes of exposition and 2 visions which sort of act as hints. The Jedi operating under a specific rules of engagement is a concept introduced in the first and last scene. These rules do not yet come with an explanation, but one will be necessary to inform the story going forward, as it is not a given that the Jedi work this way. Master Indara says that Jedi do not attack the unarmed, but May is not unarmed. She has the Force. She has enhanced strength. She clearly has skill in hand-to-hand combat, and she also has knives. May also threatens the lives of 2 civilians in the bar after beating up several of the aliens sitting with Master Indara. So if the intent for the opening fight is to demonstrate May's ruthlessness and skill, it is effective. If the point is to prove something about the Jedi's usage of Force, this doesn't really come across because Indara refuses to fight with her lightsaber, even to save the lives of others. If the point is that the Jedi's rigid code against using weapons against the unarmed has a loophole, then why doesn't Master Indara draw her lightsaber as soon as May draws her knives and threatens to kill a bystander? This is still only the first episode, and there may be further explanation later on, but this Jedi code is unique to this show, from what I know, and it warrants exploration. Subjectively, see, this is the part where I say things that are my opinion, I find the exposition in this episode to be a little tedious. I personally think that Osha looking at the fire on the outside of the ship while hearing screaming in her head, combined with the dream flashback later on, is plenty of hinting for the first episode. I feel similarly about lines like May saying, "Hello, sister," when she sees her sister, or Master Vernestra addressing Sol as, "Sol, my dear friend." These ideas can be communicated via the actions and body language of characters, which would preserve the realism of human dialogue, and this would help my immersion in the narrative. I don't want to pretend to be a screenwriter, I'm not, but an alternative way to present these ideas would be having Sol and Vernestra share a quick embrace, or be visibly excited to see one another to communicate the intent of her line, "Sol, my dear friend." If the intent with that scene is that Sol doesn't fully trust Vernestra, that tone is not communicated whatsoever in their interaction, and her addressing him as her dear friend is just stiff dialogue. When Osha meets Yord, she punches him playfully in the arm, and he is a little surprised, like nobody in his life really treats him that way. Now, this is an example of how a relationship and personalities are being communicated non-verbally and efficiently, but the dialogue then stumbles when communicating backstory information. In that same scene, Yord tells Osha her own backstory for the audience's benefit. Now, this is awkward from a writing perspective. Human beings do not generally describe their personal history with one another before arresting them for murder. A workaround here could be Yord telling this information to somebody else, or maybe learning it from the first time from Sol, or Osha saying all this to her mechanic friend, or omitting the scene completely because Sol tells Jeki Lon all the same information like 2 scenes later. Now, I am not going to pretend in this video that I am a screenwriter, or that I can do it better than people who get paid to write. I like to include these sections because I enjoy the process of brainstorming and finding ways to make story moments more efficient. It's just a thought experiment for me, not intended to be taken as part of the analysis or anything. Also, this is more of a nitpick, but the mystery of this episode hinging on Osha and May having grown up to keep the same haircut feels overly convenient. They are played by the same actress, which is enough visual similarity to raise suspicion of Osha without having nearly identical hair, although it is still a mystery how Yord and a bartender managed to track Osha to the Nemoidian ship based on her appearance alone. I should mention here, I'm not going to reference the wider Star Wars canon very often in this video. It's my opinion that every story has to stand on its own 2 feet with its own internal logic for better or worse. So if there exists a galaxy-wide database of people's appearances in the Star Wars canon, they don't bring it up here. So I'm not sure how Yord located Osha based on her appearance alone in only a matter of hours, when it is stated to be illegal for her to be working there. So it's likely they don't have records of her. Yord also says that illegal space mechanics bunk ship to ship, which implies that they don't stay in one place for very long. A proposed explanation could be that the Jedi Order keeps track of those who have been through Jedi training and are actively tracking Osha. But this is the difference between the writing giving an explanation and me making something up to satisfy my curiosity and is not actually true in the text. Alright, back to objectivity. Episode 2, Revenge/Justice. May breaks into a local Jedi temple on the planet Olega. She's trying to kill a Jedi who's deep in meditation, suspended a couple feet off the ground. She tells this Jedi, named Master Torben, to attack her with all his strength, the same way she did for Master Indara in the first episode. He does not react, and she's not able to strike at him because of some kind of forced projection around the guy. Torben is played by a much younger actor that looks to be in his late 20s, but he's been given a makeup scar and a beard to give the impression of age. With the Jedi gang, Yord is raising concerns over not restraining Osha, which Sol ignores.
I must protest over not restraining the prisoner. She has escaped once before.
Sol has a conversation with Vernestra via hologram, who encourages Sol to bring Osha to help investigate the break-in on Olega. So far, all of Vernestra's dialogue has had dishonest undertones. In the first episode, she asks Sol's help in covering up the truth about how Indara was killed, and in this episode, she does not provide a reason why Osha, who is a murder suspect at this point, would be an asset to a Jedi investigation. On Olega, May seeks a poison from her friend Kimmer and reveals that she is obligated to kill 4 specific Jedi. Torben willingly drinks poison and asks May for forgiveness. Once on scene, Osha identifies the poison as being from her home planet, which leads the gang to have Osha pose as May to extract a confession from Kimmer, who is operating the local apothecary. Sol gives Osha a weapon and says that she knows how to use it from her Jedi training. The Jedi lay a trap for May at the apothecary, and Sol resolves to confront May alone. Sol and May fight hand-to-hand in the street without weapons. Yord watches the engagement with binoculars from around 20 feet away before eventually intervening. May learns that Osha is still alive, escapes from Yord and Sol by using the Force to scatter dust into the air. Osha, when given a clear shot at May, who's about to escape, hesitates for a moment, and then fires twice, missing both times. So either Sol was wrong when he said that Osha knew how to handle the weapon, or Osha had second thoughts upon seeing her sister and missed on purpose. Osha missing twice makes it more likely that she is not proficient with the stun gun. Because if her intention was to let May go, then it doesn't make as much sense that she fires a second time. There is nothing in the scene to suggest that Osha is faking her effort to prevent May's escape, but she wouldn't need to do this anyway, because, as she establishes earlier, she's under no obligation to help the Jedi. We then cut to Sol talking to Vernestra via hologram. Vernestra holds Sol responsible for Osha failing to capture May, despite it having been Vernestra's idea for Osha to participate in the investigation on Olega.
Would you like me to investigate or bring Osha back to Coruscant?
Go investigate. Take Osha with you. She could be an asset.
The next day, May and Kimmer escape the Jedi watching the apothecary. It is not stated why the Jedi did not arrest Kimmer once May had evaded them the previous night. Kimmer also briefly exhibits significant hand-to-hand combat skill, disarming May, even though she had the jump on him. On the forested planet Kofar, there is a short scene teasing the Wookiee Jedi Kelnaka that May is hunting. Much of this episode is small talk and relationship building, and a little bit of mystery development. Our insight into what May is up to shows us that she has a task to kill 4 specific Jedi. We don't yet know why, although the apology from Torben would suggest that they have some sort of connection with May's backstory. For the relationship building, May talks to Kimmer about her task, Osha talks to Sol and Jeki about her past, Yord talks to Jeki about their plans, and Jeki chides him both times, giving some context to their relationship.
Stun him, if need be. Then we bring him back to the ship for questioning.
Or we skip that, and she just talks to him.
What if this guy's lying? What if this is a trap?
Yord sticks to the plan.
Do not interfere.
The mystery of May and her mission is expanded on a little. It is revealed that May has some sort of master or teacher. This is not new information for the audience, only for Sol.
I see your master has taken great pains to hide his identity. Even from you. You could tell me who he is even if you wanted to.
Get out of my head, Jedi.
There are multiple references to unarmed combat, and that May must execute one of her targets without a weapon, a concept that, similar to the first episode, does not receive further explanation. We see May attempt to grab the lightsaber off of her opponents, but then in the first episode she leaves Indara's behind, so she must only be trying to disarm them, but she doesn't want to keep lightsabers for herself. The last half of the episode takes place on a city street set, and the camera work attempts to make the most of this space by shooting from a variety of angles and employing some trickery to simulate scale. Yord watching the fight with binoculars, even though he's only like 20 feet away, the Jedi monitoring the apothecary with binoculars from across the street, and Yord spotting May through binoculars over an unspecified distance, are examples of ways that these binoculars are being used to give the impression that this city street is very large, but the actual set is small enough that we can see the action and the other side of the street with the naked eye. When May makes her dusty escape, there's nowhere for her to go except up through a doorway behind her, but nobody chases her up there or uses their force powers to clear away the dust. Subjectively, I feel like this blocking and usage of these sets makes the scenes in the street look claustrophobic and a little cheap. I would guess that the director did not have the scenes blocked out on this specific set, or that the budget could not produce a set large enough for these scenes to happen as envisioned. The economical usage of the street set gives the action scenes in episode 2 a sort of network TV feeling, similar to what you might see in lower budget projects on the CW or a sci-fi channel, or in the Kenobi series here on Disney+. This feeling is circumvented in quicker scenes that don't dwell in the sets as long, or that use more close-ups and a moving camera. The interiors of the apothecary and the interiors of the spaceships, or the fight scene from episode 1, are examples of how some trickery can help the set not wear out its welcome in the scene. Similar to the haircuts as a plot contrivance, the poison used to kill Master Torban being specific to Osha's home planet, and then May leaving the poison vial on the ground for anybody to find, feels very convenient. May neglecting such an obvious detail makes her seem more inept at assassination than her initial portrayal, which detracts from her threat as an antagonist. There are multiple instances of May's master being referred to as a he, despite never seeing their face. Given the level of voice distortion in the lines we hear from him in the first episode, this could be a deliberate misdirection. Kimmer's competence with fighting and ability to anticipate May's surprise attack is not discussed further in this episode. The strength of this episode is the buildup of Osha's character and what it would mean to her if May does turn out to be alive. However, what should be a big emotional moment for Osha and May comes and goes very quickly. Neither twin really gets to have a chance to reflect on what it means to them that their sister is alive. Also, it was around this point in writing this that I realized this was going to be a really long video, at least by my standards. So if you enjoy this sort of thing and want to see more, feel free to suggest future projects, or if you would rather have a civilized debate about this analysis in the comments, I'm totally here for it. Episode 3, Destiny. This is a flashback episode to 16 years prior on the planet Brendok, where Osha and May are from. In the opening, we establish that May and Osha both have some ability with the Force, and we set up a tone for both twins. Back at their cliffside fortress, Mother Anastasia is the leader of the society and demonstrates her mastery of the Force, or, as she calls it, the thread. She explains that some claim to use the Force, but that, quote, the thread is not a power you wield, unquote. She then uses the Force to push around some students and pushes the twins to the ground for not listening to her. May is shown to be more confident using the Force, and Osha is reprimanded for being more timid. This line about the thread appears to paint the Jedi as misunderstanding how the Force works, and that the witches have a more enlightened perspective of it. Anastasia then uses the Force as telekinesis, similar to how the Jedi use it, so this doesn't provide further insight to what she means. At the Ascension ceremony that night, the witches are conducting a ritual dance. Anastasia speaks while the witches sway and pant, some of their eyes closed or fluttering. A euphoric screaming can be heard in the crowd. This is an auditory and visual reference to black magic and pagan rituals that we see in films like Midsommar or The Witch or Mother.
We were on the brink of extinction. The gift of life.
Yeah, I know tonally these scenes really couldn't be more different. I'm just trying to identify possible sources of inspiration. Anastasia explains to the witches that their people were, quote, hunted, persecuted, and forced into hiding, unquote, and that they were on the brink of extinction, but were blessed with a miracle, a gift of life, gesturing to Osha and May. The witches chant, and May is given a circular mark on her forehead, marking her ascension. Before Osha can be marked, 4 Jedi appear at the same 4 that May is hunting in the present day. Indara says that she is concerned that the witches are training children, which is against Republic law. We learn that the twins have no father. Presumably, this means that the miracle of life referred to earlier was literal, and the twins were immaculately conceived. The witches are afraid that the Jedi will take the children. Sol says that they do not take children. He offers Osha for her to be tested to become a Jedi, and Osha agrees. In response to this, Anastasia mind controls Torben and threatens the Jedi, telling them to leave. But Osha asks to be tested by the Jedi anyway. Indara says, quote, "You cannot deny that Jedi have the right to test potential Padawans. With your permission, of course," unquote. Anastasia releases Torben, and Sol demands that both girls be brought up for testing. These lines contain inconsistency in the tone for the Jedi and the Coven, but more on that in a bit. Anastasia and her advisors decide to let the Jedi test the girls, guided by the philosophy that Osha is old enough to decide what she wants. The advisors decide to have the twins fail the Jedi test on purpose. Anastasia remarks that this is, quote, about power and those allowed to use it, unquote. This statement is not specific to this immediate plot moment and could be viewed as more of a thesis of the show. May confronts Osha, saying she will prevent Osha from leaving by killing her, and locks Osha in her room. May lights Osha's sketchbook on fire, and off-screen we hear the shattering of glass and a fire spreads, destroying the Coven. Some witches are shown dead on the ground, including Anastasia, although we never see her face, and May falls into a pit and is presumed dead by Osha and Sol. Sol rescues Osha and afterwards explained what happened while on the Jedi ship to Coruscant. A quick scene of May looking for Osha under the tree from the beginning, and the episode ends. So episode 3 elaborates on the backstory dialogue from episode 1. What is added here in this dedicated flashback is world building and the origins for Osha and May. A tone for both the Jedi Order and for the Coven is unclear. Anastasia praises the twins and spoils them, dictating that they be given treats, but she shoves them over with the Force for not listening to her in the next scene. This is the Star Wars equivalent of beating children, but it doesn't affect how anyone in the story treats Anastasia, so it's a little unclear what the tone is supposed to be for that moment. Through the performance and dialogue from Anastasia, the Coven is portrayed as respectful of the children's feelings at first, but their actions contradict this by forcing May to take the Jedi test even though she doesn't want to, and telling Osha to lie even though she doesn't want to. It is stated that the laws of the Republic do not apply on Brendok, and Indara even asks Anastasia's permission to test the children.
The Republic law states...
Brendok is not a part of the Republic.
So the Coven appears to be under no obligation to have the twins take this Jedi test, and then push them into failing the test on purpose. If the goal for the scene between Anastasia and Indara is to demonstrate an imbalanced power dynamic that implies the potential use of Force from the Jedi, this is undermined by Anastasia proving to be a dangerous Force user by mind-controlling Torben. Likewise, the Jedi don't have a clear tone either, and they contradict themselves several times. Indara says that the Jedi have a, quote, right to test children, unquote, but then asks Anasea's permission to do so. Sol says they do not take children, but in the same scene demands that both children be tested. Especially with the kindness that Sol shows when he speaks to Osha, it's unclear if the Jedi are meant to be seen as malevolent authoritarians or benign mentors in this episode. It's possible that the show is going for both, and the tonal ambiguity is deliberate, and this is an attempt to instill a gray morality into both factions. The Jedi might be somehow responsible for the death of the witches and the destruction of the Coven. The fire is started off-screen, and the witches' bodies are piled nowhere close to any fire or falling debris. We also do not actually see Anasea or Mother Coral's bodies. This episode has more intense emotional beats than the previous two, and subjectively, I find that some of these performances are effective in conveying the emotions of the moment, and some are not. Despite her character being written with some contradictions about physically harming children, Jodie Turner-Smith is kind, authoritative, but vulnerable as Mother Anasea. Lee Jung-jae brings warmth to all of his scenes as Master Sol, and he has been a consistent highlight in the show so far. The children playing young Osha and May are dealt a pretty rough hand with their mostly expository lines, but even outside of that, their delivery is consistently robotic.
The Bunta tree's so beautiful. But Osha, it's dangerous. Only if we eat it.
I don't want to do the ascension.
I won't let you leave. You can't go. We're stuck here now.
It's not up to you. You can't stop me.
Yes, I can.
How?
I'll kill you. The Jedi are bad.
The Jedi are good.
The world building in this episode exists in a vacuum, with no details or visuals to demonstrate what the dialogue is trying to communicate. Mother Coral refers to immaculately conceiving Osha and May, and implies that there would be consequences if the Jedi discovered how they pulled this off, but they don't expand on that. Anasea says that the witches were exiled and hunted for their Force abilities, but they don't expand on that either. We're told the Jedi are feared by the witches for taking away children to be trained, but Sol clearly lets it be Osha's choice to leave, so we don't really get to see this either. Now, these are all interesting premises, but they only exist here in the dialogue and not in the actions of the characters. I'm still trying to be objective in this video, and I recognize that using the word interesting in this context just makes it a subdivision of the word good, but this is the subjective section, and I personally find the idea of the Witch Coven to be interesting. The witches and their history with the Jedi may be a known quantity in the Star Wars canon, and if that's the case, then it's only alluded to here in a couple of lines of dialogue. The strength of this episode is the crazy Star Wars concepts that it's presenting, but the shortcoming is in that execution. Nearly all of these concepts are exclusive to the exposition, and the actions of the characters contradict the tone and ideas that the dialogue is going for. Attempting to code the Jedi as being a threat to the witches needs to be supported in the actions taken by the Jedi, or at least shown in the reactions from the witches. When Sol pulls out his lightsaber, a visual response from the witches would establish what the symbol of the lightsaber represents for them. In the beginning, trying to convey a sinister tone for May by having her do the exact same force control of a butterfly that Osha was just doing, it doesn't visually differ very much, and it needs to be more distinctly unkind to convey the desired tone. The witches have dialogue that makes them sound understanding and considerate, but their actions make them out to be more abusive and forceful. The scene between the Jedi and the witches is all over the place, trying to convey distrust of the Jedi by the witches, de-escalation and kindness from Sol, fascination in the Jedi from Osha, fear of abandonment from May, cautious bargaining from Indara, and threatening violence from Anasea. The sum of these tonal contradictions are that Episode 3 feels disjointed even within individual scenes, The sheer number of new ideas here is very interesting, but it makes the episode feel rushed because there's too many concepts at play to actually expand on any of them. The majority of all the information in this episode being communicated via expository dialogue makes the episode feel slower than it needed to. More ideas could have been communicated non-verbally or with character actions and reactions that supported the tone of what the dialogue is trying to establish. Like, the witches talk a lot about how scared they are of the Jedi and how the Jedi are going to take their kids, but we don't actually see them do anything as a result of that belief. Maybe when Sol pulls out his lightsaber while meeting with the witches while speaking to their only children, the witches could all gasp and recoil or clutch their weapons tightly because they're scared of what the lightsaber means to them. Something like that to communicate an existing status quo or relationship between the witches and the Jedi, so that we don't just have to listen to characters say all of this backstory out loud for the audience's benefit. So in addition to not being a professional screenwriter, I'm also not a professional video editor, which is probably obvious to those of you who are. But if we wanted to make this scene relate more to what the dialogue is telling us, meaning elaborate on how the Witch Coven feels about the Jedi in their reactions, we can pull some moments from the show as it is, and then just shuffle them around to illustrate that. In the original cut, we see very little of how the witches actually feel about this interaction between Sol and Osha. But if we move some stuff around, like maybe we take the reaction from the witches when they hear Kelnaka growl, and we plug that into when Sol takes out his lightsaber, we see that the act of pulling out the lightsaber from Sol automatically puts the witches on their guard, which tells us a lot about how the witches feel about lightsabers and about Jedi. Osha has her interaction with Sol, which goes against what May wants and what the witches want for Osha. And then we'll throw in another clip from the reaction to Kelnaka of the witches not being approving of what Osha is doing. So here's the original scene.
Out for you! So, no.
And here's the scene with two slight additions.
Out for you! So, no.
I think you would make a very good Jedi, Osha.
I know it's not exactly rocket science, but this plants a couple of story seeds to be paid off later instead of those reactions being used to kill Naka's moment, which is a moment to be paid off later, but it's nowhere near as thematically important as how the witches feel about the Jedi. Episode 4, Day. On the forested planet Kofar, the Wookiee Kelnaka has symbols drawn in his walls that resemble those found on the foreheads of Anaseya and May. On Coruscant, Osha says goodbye to her new friend Jeki Lond, saying that her innocence is proven and she can leave now. This isn't exactly true. They have proven that May is alive, but not that Osha is innocent. Yord even has a line about how the two might be working together, but it never gets brought up again.
Let's say this twin theory holds true. They could be working together.
Osha decides not to join the Jedi in searching for her sister. Meanwhile, May and Kimmer are on Kofar looking for Kelnaka. Vernestra and the Jedi are analyzing May's attack patterns via hologram, and they determine that May is a threat and has had some sort of Jedi training. Vernestra raises suspicions about who trained May specifically. Her dialogue is all aggressive and snarky to her fellow Jedi.
You think a Jedi taught her? Even a hologram can tell me that.
She opts to cover up their conclusions about May as a threat by not informing the High Council, saying that this would cause a scandal. Vernestra appoints a team to intercept May on Kofar, and when asked what to do if May resists arrest, Vernestra says,
And if she doesn't come peacefully? Not expecting it to come to that.
In this scene, Vernestra is, once again, obfuscating the truth to save the Jedi Order possible political embarrassment, similar to how her dialogue operates in the first episode. She is condescending to the Jedi around her and to Sol. She deliberately puts no plan in place to subdue May,
If she resists arrest, and Holden neutralizes her,
It won't come to that.
despite having determined May to be a threat in this very scene. Vernestra and Sol decide to bring Osha along to be used as a bargaining chip with May. The sum here could be foreshadowing that Vernestra might become a more overtly villainous character later in the show. On Kofar, Kimmer is asking May about the rules around killing a Jedi while unarmed, and what exactly that means. When May asks him about the Sith Master, Kimmer acts shifty and he gives no details. Sol asks Osha to join in their search for May, trying to convince Osha that May might still have some good in her. Osha is not convinced, but she goes anyway. Jeki Lon, Yord, Sol, and Osha, and a team of fellow Jedi that don't have names, use a small gopher-like creature named Basil to track Kilnaka. Osha expresses concerns to Yord about stopping May, saying that she had hesitated before. So this confirms from episode 2 that Sol is indeed wrong, and Osha is not capable with a handheld projectile weapon. In this episode, Osha insists that she keep the Jedi blaster on her person, but also admits that she doesn't trust herself to shoot at May given the chance. It is unclear why Osha demands to keep the stunner after she has demonstrated low confidence and low ability with the weapon. This could be a character moment for Sol, like he's placing too much trust in Osha's abilities, but it doesn't make as much sense for Osha, who's both not confident with or capable with the weapon, and is not particularly rebellious in this show so far, so it's weird that she's using this moment to act out against Yord, even though they're supposed to be friends. Kimmer goes to fetch May some water, and May sets a trap for him, and once he's caught, May monologues about how she doesn't need to kill a Jedi without a weapon, and doesn't need to honor the deal she made. She says that Osha being alive changes everything, and that her loyalty is to Osha and not Kimmer's master. May decides to surrender herself to Kilnaka, and Kimmer says that he'll kill you, meaning the Sith Master, and May doubts this. May says that even he, meaning the Sith Master, might not be able to find Kilnaka without a guide. May believes she can convince the Jedi out of punishment by telling them who she knows.
The Jedi will put you in prison.
Not after I tell them who I know.
Now, it is not obvious who she is referring to with this line. She does not know the identity of the Sith Master. She leaves Kimmer tied upside down in the jungle. May's treatment of Kimmer demonstrates how vicious she is. She abandons the person helping her at every turn. This is consistent with her characterization throughout the show so far. She has threatened the life of 2 innocent people in the bar to distract Master Indara, and threatened to kill her sister in the flashback when they were children.
I'll kill you.
Sol tells Osha that they're both going to face their past, saying that he will explain everything to Osha once they're back at the ship. This explanation will likely be the reveal that the Jedi started the fire or murdered the Witch Coven in the flashback. May arrives at Kilnaka's home, but the Wookiee is dead in his chair, a fresh lightsaber mark across his chest. May remarks that he's here, and night falls. The Jedi arrive at Kilnaka's home as well. The Sith Master from Episode 1 drops down behind the group from above the frame. It stands close to Osha and draws a red lightsaber. Sol and the Jedi pull their lightsabers and charge. The Sith character tosses Osha to one side with the Force, and then throws the entire Jedi party backward and the episode ends. In Episode 4, the mystery here is focused on the identity of May and Kimmer's master. The Sith identity is the primary concern of Sol and Vernestra, and there is dialogue between May and Kimmer about what he might look like and the purpose behind May's task. Because the Sith shows up at Kilnaka's home after May states that even he couldn't find the house without a guide, Kimmer disappears and then is the only living person that actually knows where Kilnaka is. Plus, we saw Kimmer's demonstration of skill and superhuman reflexes in Episode 2. All the evidence is pointing to Kimmer as being the Sith. Actually, we know it's the case that Vernestra knows that Kilnaka is at least on Kofar, although it's not clear if she knows where specifically on the planet he is.
Master Holden, extract Kilnaka from his post on Kofar.
And that's where his post is, even though he's living in like a bombed out old ship. But if she knew where it was, then I don't know why Sol and Yord would need to use a gopher to find him, and this might come up later. We get one more line about how it goes against the Jedi's beliefs to attack an unarmed person. However, this line is from May, who is shown to hate the Jedi, so it isn't totally clear if this is actually true, or if this is just something she personally believes. If the intent with Mei's quest is to bait the Jedi into doing something against their code, Mei attacking the Jedi with knives muddies the line on what constitutes being armed. The through line about attacking a Jedi without a weapon has not really been resolved, and the purpose for the bylaws around killing the Jedi without a weapon have not yet been made clear. There is some dialogue from Kimmer in the beginning that questions what exactly it means to be unarmed, but he doesn't clear up these questions at all. The other focus of this episode is on Osha, Mei, and Saul and how they feel about the revelation that both twins are alive. Saul feels responsible for everything and has something to tell Osha about their past. Osha is conflicted. She's unable to attack Mei, but still harboring anger and a belief that Mei is too far gone and can't be helped. Mei, upon processing that Osha is alive, abandons her quest completely. Her loyalty to Osha changes Mei's perspective about the deal she made with the Sith. There is more expansion here on the corruption of the Jedi Order, with Master Vernestra explicitly instructing her Jedi not to spread knowledge of Mei for fear of it making them look bad. In this and the first episode, it has been Vernestra's idea to cover up potentially embarrassing truth. Here in episode 4, she is condescending towards her fellow Jedi, she puts down practical ideas, and she makes a snide comment about how obviously Mei has had Jedi training. She states multiple times in response to concerns about Mei resisting arrest that it won't come to that, despite Mei having proven to be resistant to arrest before. Vernestra's interactions with Sol are always her reprimanding him for things outside of his control, such as not reporting the possibility that Mei was still alive, even though he thought Mei was dead, and for Osha letting Mei escape in episode 2, even though it was Vernestra's idea for Osha to participate in the first place. So if the creative intent for Vernestra's character is to be aggressively insecure as a representation of the corruption of the Jedi Order, it is effective. Subjectively, episode 4 feels like it has low emotional stakes because we never get a scene of either Osha or Mei going through what it means to them that their sister is still alive. Osha talks to Yord and Jekulon about her feelings, but there's no emotion in these exchanges. Osha explains how she feels in the same way one would describe how to change the oil on your car, dispassionately and to the point, without emoting with expressions or body language.
Well, I could never accept death as a true Jedi should.
A true Jedi.
I couldn't accept what I'd lost. How unfair it felt. The resentment that I felt for my sister, even though I missed her at the same time.
Mei asks Kimmer about Osha kind of sheepishly, but we never get to see how she feels about the answers she gets. When Mei changes her mind about her quest, she does so in an instant with no visible reaction, possibly having contemplated the gravity of Osha being alive sometime off-screen. What's missing here is a chance for the audience to feel the emotional weight of the sisters seeing each other again. Both Osha and Mei, if they are our main characters, need a scene after the events of episode 2 that shows us what it means to them that their twin is alive. The unfortunate placement of episode 3 breaks up this narrative. It gives backstory, but it takes the audience out of what is a pivotal emotional moment. Episode 4 then picks up sometime after episode 2. Osha has been acquitted of murder and has had time to process seeing Mei again. But we didn't get to see any of that. We also see nothing of Mei traveling to Kofar or how she feels about having seen Osha. The placement of episode 3 and the time jump between episodes 2 and 4 makes both sisters' emotional journeys skip a very important beat that would inform how we see these characters and what choices they will make going forward. Some of this is an issue of pacing, and it could have been helped by spreading scenes of episode 3 throughout episodes 1, 2, and 4, cutting back and forth between present and past so that we never take too long of a break from the main story. Another possible solution could be to only show brief glimpses of the Coven from Osha's unreliable childhood perspective, but never giving us the full story, and then when Sol explains what actually happened, Osha and the audience will finally get some truth and some closure. I know that proposing edits like this is more in line with this series if it were in a movie format, and that really might be an editing project I'd take on after this. Although it would take me a really long time, I think this story would flow more evenly, from my perspective, if we didn't have to take such a long break from the present day to learn about everybody's emotional context. As it is, there's no real mystery as to what happened at the Coven, only how exactly it happened. If Osha and the audience still weren't certain about what became of the witches or what happened to May, then it would be a big deal when Saul tells us the truth. But the show is very explicit that something outside of our current understanding happened on Brendok, and given the guilt that Saul has been carrying this whole time, and the deceptive editing of Episode 3, it is a very safe bet that the Jedi are somehow at fault for the death of the witches. Overall, the lack of emotional context makes Episode 4 feel empty. We never see adult Osha or May angry or sad or mournful or conflicted or excited. Feelings are only communicated to the audience in the characters' lines, but never in their actions or reactions. May changes her mind about pursuing her quest, a decision that is motivated by a sense of loyalty to Osha, and this puts May's life in danger from both her master and the Jedi Order. This is a very significant decision for May, but she doesn't show any emotion over this. She doesn't discuss it with Kimmer beforehand. She doesn't reflect on what it means to her that Osha is alive. She says it changes everything, but what does this mean? How does it change everything? The audience doesn't have context for her mission and how it might be motivated by May thinking that Osha's dead, so this line is reliant on our speculation to make any sense. There's no reasons in this story for May not to feel anything through these scenes. In fact, as a child, she's shown to be possessive and angry, so it's unclear to me why the direction for her adult self is so stiff.
I'll kill you.
Osha has lines that describe her feelings, but she does this passively. She says she's angry at May. She says she got a giant beetle killed. Jackie Lon says Osha mourns the years lost with May, but Osha herself doesn't do anything in this episode that shows motivation or emotion. So if the point of Osha's character is that she's supposed to be emotionally closed off, having her describe her emotions kind of goes against this. If you wanted to show a character being emotionally closed off, you wouldn't have them emotionlessly describe their feelings. You would have them ignore their feelings. So if the intent with Osha's character is that she is unable to express her grief and anger at whatever's happened to her, having her describe that grief and anger is not an effective way of doing this, and is not realistic to the way that people behave in real life. A character who is emotionally underdeveloped to the point that they are unable to express anger or grief or pain in a healthy way, they don't have the vocabulary to express themselves. That's what makes them emotionally closed off. If Osha was able to verbalize all these feelings that she is suppressing, then how is she still suppressing them? If that is indeed the point of the character, her suppressing her emotions should be manifest in actions or coping mechanisms. Normally, a character who is experiencing some sort of internal conflict is shown to be covering up those emotions by acting in like the opposite way. We might see a character act really positively all the time and then break down in private or express their internalized anger at other things while maintaining a facade that belies their underlying emotional state.
Morty, if we're gonna survive tonight, you're gonna need to harness your repressed rage. I don't have any! Spoken like a person with repressed rage.
Part of this is just characterizing a character in a story, and part of this is also the difference between telling versus showing. Osha, describing her emotions, does not communicate her emotions as well as it would if she were acting like somebody who possessed those emotions. The bottom line here is that Osha and May are not highly motivated characters, and this has ripple effects for my investment in the plot. A possible fix here would be to clarify May's stake in the story from the very beginning, making it clear that her life is on the line if she cannot pass her test, and what is motivating her for her quest. Kimmer having one line about how the Master will kill May for betraying him towards the end of Episode 4 is too little too late. Another possible fix: Osha needs to have more screen time that shows us how important May was to her, or how seeing May again motivates Osha to keep the plot moving forward. The hints of Episode 1 are the effective beginnings of a story about Osha's trauma over whatever happened at the Coven, but this never manifests in her actions. As it is, both sisters are passengers in the story. They're being led by the hand from scene to scene. May is rescued from Olega by Kimmer, who provides an escape and a ship and the route to Kilnaka. Osha has to be convinced to join the search on Kofar by Sol to look for her sister. I'm no screenwriter, and I don't mean this section to sound condescending to the people that do this for a living, but I think we can all agree that motivated characters are an important part of a compelling narrative, and this story doesn't have any with the exception of Sol. And I don't mean motivated like all of the main characters have to want something so deeply that it's the only thing they can think about, you know? The main characters don't even have to be the only people driving the story, but they do have to have some investment in what's going on. Side characters shouldn't have to twist the arm of main characters to convince them to participate in the plot. It makes the entire thing feel extremely low stakes. Twisting the main character's arm to get them into the story is part of the classic reluctant heroes arc that occurs in the very beginning before their call to action, but we're in episode 4 here. We are halfway through the show, and Osha and May still haven't made up their minds about whether or not they feel like participating. If the characters don't have strong investment in the outcome of this plot, then how can I as an audience member? The most engaging elements of this story so far are the teased mystery of the Master, and Sol living with his guilt over the mystery of the Witch Coven. A potential issue in crafting a story around mysteries like this is that once the mystery is solved, the story might have nothing else to keep your attention. Lost. So my hope for the remaining episodes in this series is that they will invest in Osha, May, and Sol and double down on the corruption of the Jedi theme, but not rely on a big reveal that the Jedi somehow got the witches killed to retain audience investment, because it's just a little predictable, even as early as episode 3. I am not comfortable calling Amandla Stenberg a bad actress and placing all of this lack of emotion on her. She's been capable in the show's more lighthearted moments, but in keeping with Star Wars tradition, the direction for her character is just lifeless.
I don't like sand.
Episode 5, Night. Osha wakes up on the ground. She sees lightsabers clashing some distance away and approaches to reveal the Sith fighting all of the nameless Jedi all at once. The Master is cutting through the Jedi quickly, using his helmet and bracer to hit the lightsabers' handles, which disables them momentarily. The fight is quick, it's brutal, and it's tightly choreographed. Sol arrives on the scene and tells Osha to go back to the ship, Yord escorting her away from the fight. As soon as they leave, Osha demands that they go back, but Yord pushes her on. May, still hiding in Kilnaka's house, is ambushed by Jeki Lon. Eventually, Jeki secures May in handcuffs and tries to arrest her. Sol and the Master continue fighting with lightsabers, seemingly an even match. Sol tells the Sith to remove his helmet, and the Master says,
Show your face and let you read my thoughts.
It is set up in episode 2 that Sol has the ability to read people's minds. He does it to May in their fight scene.
Tell me who he is, even if you wanted to.
Get out of my head, Jedi.
It is not specified what the limitations of this ability are, but it seems like the Master's helmet blocks Sol's mind-reading ability, like Magneto from X-Men. The Sith implies that Sol has been hiding his true face from Osha, and this is likely in reference to the secret about what really happened at the Witch Coven that Sol has not disclosed. Osha asks Yord about the Sith, and Yord says,
He gets into your head and he stays there.
Osha responds that her mother could do the same thing, saying she saw it once. We do not see the Sith Master do the mind control ability from episode 3, or anything that backs up what Yord is talking about. This line, combined with Osha's reaction to it, draws correlation between the Sith and the Witch Coven Society, but we do not see May's Master do anything visually that supports this. The Sith shows up and fights Jeki Lon. He tells May that she can learn from the Padawan, as Jeki is loyal. May uses this as a distraction to run away. Osha and Yord enter the section of the forest where the giant beetles live, and Osha tells Yord to turn off his lightsaber, saying that it attracts them.
The light attracts them.
Attracts what?
Despite having been present in the previous episode when they established that the beetles were attracted to light.
It went straight for the saber.
It's attracted to light. Attracts what? It's attracted to light. It's attracted to light.
This line is probably just here to provide a smooth question and answer transition in the script to show the beetles again, but it comes at the expense of making Yord forgetful. Total side note, but I learned recently that this is actually called an alley-oop line, where a character says something out of character or unnecessary, to get that one-liner or special piece of dialogue that didn't fit in anywhere else.
We'll get him when he comes back in!
He's not coming back.
In this case, the alley-oop is just a setup to show the Beatles again. The Sith finds May and calls her weak, cutting her handcuffs in two. He winds up to execute her, but is attacked by Sol and Jackie Lon. May tries to run away again, and the Sith chases her, prioritizing killing May over his fight with Sol and Jackie. Osha hears May's voice in her head, saying, Osha, and insists to Yord that they have to go back, that the Sith is going to kill them all. She turns on a flashlight to draw the Beatles out. Osha and Yord run back towards the group. Sol and Jackie are fighting the Master. Jackie finds herself in a 1v1 for a short time, but loses very quickly. She knocks the Sith helmet off, and it is revealed to be Kimmer under the helmet. They do a series of question and answer here. Sol asks Kimmer several questions, while May is being held at saber point. When asked who he is, Kimmer says that I have no name, but Jedi like you might call me Sith. This phrasing leaves the door open for Kimmer to not actually be Sith, but that the Jedi might still think of him that way. Sol asks, why risk discovery? To which Kimmer answers, well, I did wear a mask. This line is probably an attempt at humor and doesn't really answer Sol's question. When asked what he wants, Kimmer says that he wants freedom to wield my power the way I like without having to answer to Jedi like you. Now this line is evocative of what Mother Anastasia said in episode 3, quote, this is about power and those allowed to use it, unquote. And again, both of these lines are not specific to the situations they are set in and could be interpreted as a statement of theme for the show. Kimmer continues his speech. He says he wants a pupil, an acolyte. He says he has to kill all the Jedi that have seen him because the Jedi do not allow people like him to exist. This statement is again very similar to the way that Anastasia is speaking about the Jedi's use of force throughout the galaxy. Kimmer ends by telling Sol, look at you two, right back where you started. So, either Kimmer was present for what happened at the Witch Coven, or he heard about it later from May, but we do not know his backstory yet. Yord shows up and attacks Kimmer, who... Sol is about to execute the unarmed Kimmer, but Osha calls out to him, staying his hand. And Kimmer laughs at Osha, calling her loyalty into question after everything Sol did to her, and questions Sol's inner darkness. These lines are almost certainly in reference to whatever really happened to the witches. Sol does not execute Kimmer, saying that the Jedi do not attack the unarmed. Kimmer says, rules, rules, rules. If you don't ever follow them, you don't have to break them. Maybe he means that he lives by no rules. Other than that, I am only speculating as to what he's referring to. Osha sticks her droid flashlight to Kimmer. Oh, yeah, she has a droid, and I haven't mentioned it because it wasn't important yet. Attracted to the light, the Beatles carry Kimmer off into the forest. Osha asks about what Kimmer had said, and before Sol has a chance to explain, May stuns him unconscious. Osha and May have their first scene together as the sun rises. They see the events of their past from different perspectives. May has a line that is a callback to Revenge of the Sith.
They've turned you against me.
You turned her against me!
May implores Osha to choose her and not the Jedi. Osha declines and has her own callback line.
Don't do this. You did this to yourself.
You have done that yourself!
Amandla Stenberg is playing both sisters, and their brief altercation is filmed in shot-reverse shot, obscuring the face of one sister at a time. This is likely to save money on the special effects that would need to be implemented to replace the face for a stunt double. Only once in this scene is Stenberg's face visible on both sisters in one shot, but it isn't at the same time. The camera moves around the pair as they hug, revealing their different reactions at the embrace. At the conclusion of the fight, Osha is knocked unconscious. May takes Yord's lightsaber and cuts her hair to match Osha's length. Kimmer frees himself from the Beatles. Osha wakes up Sol, saying that May is gone. Sol and May walk back to the ship, trailed by Basil. Kimmer recovers his helmet and hunches over an unconscious May, spreading some cloth on her, saying,
even in the revelation of our triumph, we see the depth of our despair.
This is the conclusion of the episode. We see that the sister on the ground is Osha because of her mechanic tattoo that is established in episode 1. So episode 5 is the big reveal for the antagonist, and further setup for the mystery of what really happened to the witches. Fight scenes show us that Kimmer is a dangerous opponent. The power hierarchy is clearly communicated through the results of each altercation. Kimmer takes on 4 Jedi at once and dispatches them quickly. Sol and Jackie Lan together aren't quite a match for him. Jackie Lan can subdue and arrest May, but she is no match for Kimmer one-on-one. Only fueled by his rage at the loss of Yord and Jackie Lan is Sol able to gain an upper hand on Kimmer without lightsabers. These fights are effective in showing the audience how strong Kimmer is, and this gives weight to his threat to kill the Jedi that have seen him. The fighting is broken up with stretches of dialogue that expand on Kimmer's motivations and hint at the fate of the witches. The end of this episode sets up several angles of conflict going forward. Osha and May are shown to have switched places. Basil has Osha's scent and might be in a position to reveal May. Kimmer now has Osha, and we might soon see payoff for his lines about how disloyal a follower May was, with an attempt to convert Osha to his side. Sol was about to reveal his secret to Osha. Now this information might be revealed to May instead. There is potential in the coming episodes for perspective change from both sisters. There is a lot of hinting at a backstory for Kimmer. Sol senses him as being familiar. Kimmer knows about Sol's darkness, and Kimmer echoes the spirit of Mother Anastasia with his desire to wield power in his own way. The evidence here points to Kimmer somehow being connected to the Witch Coven from Episode 3. Subjectively, the structure of the scenes and the dialogue let down what is otherwise my favorite episode in the series so far. The lightsaber combat is quick and brutal, Manny Jacinto is uniquely menacing, and the choreography brings intensity with his heavy swinging and brawling style, smashing opponent lightsaber handles and manipulating their bodies with the Force. Compared to the more controlled and precise movements of the Jedi, Kimmer stands out by fighting a very different style, lending a lot of personality with his physical performance. Showing Kimmer cutting through multiple Jedi at once shows off his character's potency as an antagonist, and I really respect the writing for killing off multiple supporting characters in a single episode just to bolster the bad guy. I pointed out in episode 2 how the city street set wasn't large enough to accommodate these scenes, and this jungle set does not share that problem. There are frequent cutaways to reactions from Osha and May. There are shots here that utilize the jungle set and Kilnaka's house environments intentionally, and the camera even moves much more than in previous action scenes, often panning with stunts to emphasize impact. Because the action in episode 5 is filmed more dynamically, it could be argued that the fight in episode 2 was shot in a more static style because May is not a threat to Sol. However, given the visual inconsistencies in those fight scenes, I don't personally buy this interpretation. Unfortunately, the dialogue in this episode is very much in step with the rest of the season so far. Characters take frequent breaks from fighting to monologue. They forget things for the audience's benefit, and most confusingly, individual motivation is all over the place. May flip-flops her goals again in this episode. May decides to betray Kimmer in episode 4, saying she can turn herself in, but prevent her imprisonment by telling the Jedi who she knows. It's possible she's referring to what she knows about Sol and the Witch Coven with that line, but it's not clear yet. Once the fighting starts in episode 5, she gets into a scrap with Jackie Lan, who handcuffs her. But instead of going with her plan to turn herself in, May starts fighting with Jackie. But why? Wasn't turning herself in exactly what May wanted?
What I'm going to do is surrender myself to Kilnaka, and then turn myself into the Jedi. No.
May does not attempt to reason with Jackie here, or go quietly, which would feed her immediate goals. In fact, May tries actively to stab Jackie Lan multiple times. If May's motivation had changed from surrender to survival upon seeing Kimmer, a line from May to Jackie would go a long way towards making that more explicit. Like when Jackie starts trying to arrest May, maybe May says something like, "We don't have time for this, he's gonna kill us all." And that would drive the threat of Kimmer and clarify May's motivation, and give May a good reason for fighting, because the last thing we saw her do is decide to surrender to the Jedi, and we have no reason to think that she changed her mind about this in between episodes. I'm not pretending to be a screenwriter, but May has a motivational contradiction in this episode, and I'm just brainstorming how to smooth it out. In the end, Osha tries to arrest May. In response, May cuts her hair with a lightsaber, changes into Osha's clothes, and goes undercover with Sol, pretending to be Osha, leaving Osha unconscious on the ground. It's fine that we don't have all the answers yet, but this is another motivation change for May, meaning she's flip-flopping now, twice in just 2 episodes on top of the contradictions in her actions. Similar to episode 4, May has a shift in motivation that is a substantial moment for her where she processes a second perceived betrayal from her long-lost sister, and May resolves to assume Osha's place to go undercover with the Jedi, a very new direction from the character, and this is communicated emotionlessly from Amandla Stenberg. The result of so much inconsistency is that May feels like she has no personality at all. These motivation changes in the show would feel less jarring if they were set up more thoroughly prior, and we got to see how the character felt about them. The choice to betray Kimmer and go undercover with the Jedi feel to the audience like they come out of nowhere because there isn't any context behind either decision. It's fine that we don't have the answers about why she does this yet, but any kind of hinting as to why she would make a choice like this would be beneficial for the audience to understand the character. I can see how what I'm saying here could be interpreted as me deliberately ignoring the backstory that we do get, or demanding that the show be overly hand-holdy and overly descriptive for me to admit to understanding what the show is going for, and that's not the case. I get that there is a very reasonable backstory baked into this character where her family got blown up, she thinks her sister's dead, she internalized a betrayal from the Jedi, she got wrapped up by some charismatic Sith guy, and then took on this task to kill those 4 specific Jedi out of a misplaced sense of justice, because she doesn't yet see the full picture of what happened to her when she was a child. I understand that that's on the table from a storytelling perspective. What I'm complaining about here is that the show is asking me to put those pieces together out of nothing. I don't get to see her training. I don't get to see her internalized betrayal. I don't get to see the things that make this character who she is. They're showing me a character's start point and a character's end point. And a story is a journey. I'm asking for the writing to show me the building blocks of this character so that the character works in the context of the writing. All right, sorry, unscripted tangent over. Kimmer's motivations are also a little murky. We get lines about how he wants to use his power the way he wants, but we don't know what that means yet. Kimmer needs to kill all the present Jedi and has decided to kill May for betraying him. But when presented with the chance to kill May, he threatens to, but then stops and answers Sol's questions for a while instead. Pausing his bloodthirsty rampage to conduct an interview with Sol kind of detracts from Kimmer as a threat and makes the episode feel slow because once the fighting dies down, none of the characters show any urgency to achieve their goals. This episode is structured by constantly cutting in between something exciting and something boring. We go from tightly choreographed lightsaber duels to Osha walking through the forest. Brutal knife fights to Osha walking through the forest. Kimmer slaughtering side characters to monologuing about his motivations and Osha still walking through the forest. Chopping up the episode like this is initially engaging, but the tension in the episode bleeds out as the dialogue jumps in to start explaining and giving hints once the fighting stops. Episode 5 contains the most entertaining moments in the show so far, but it also showcases how this story is struggling with its dialogue, emotions, and motivation for its characters, especially in the leads of Osha and May. Okay, this last one is really personal, but Kimmer's lines are often non-specific, poetic-sounding nonsense, but in particular, his final line in this episode is just gibberish. He says, "What extraordinary beings we are. Even in the revelation of our triumph, you see the depth of our despair." Is this line pertinent? Or is it just supposed to sound smart? What does this mean? The revelation of our triumph. Whose triumph? Who is triumphant in this episode? What despair is that same person suffering? Why am I reminded of that interpretive riddle that Galadriel's brother is saying in the Lord of the Rings show? Do you know why a ship floats and a rock cannot? The fuck are you talking about, dude? Episode 6, Teach/Corrupt. Episode 6 has both sisters in the company of their recent enemies, May with Sol and Osha with Kimmer. Osha wakes up in a cave, her wounds bandaged. She puts on some clothes and shoes and heads outside, following Kimmer, a knife in her hand. Some text tells us that the planet is Planet Unknown, although it is visually very similar to the island that Luke inhabits in The Last Jedi, complete with baby versions of the breastfeeding armadillos. Actually, Leslie Hitland confirmed in an interview after the show came out that this is not the same island. It just is very visually similar with very visually similar creatures that inhabit it. Back on Kofar, Sol and May are departing the planet. The chronology here is unclear. The cut between Osha and May implies that these events are happening at the same time, but Osha has been carried back to a ship by Kimmer, received medical attention, and flown to Planet Unknown, an unknown distance away, in the time that Sol and May have been walking through the woods. There obviously are many explanations for this, but nothing is made explicit to explain a chronological mismatch. On the ship, Sol puts in a patchy transmission back to Coruscant, telling them his whole team is dead. May is hearing voices in her head of the Jedi when she was tested as a child, to illustrate that she is reflecting on that time. It appears that this is the same ship that Sol and the Jedi were using 16 years ago on Brendok. While Sol is trying to send his transmission, May sneaks up behind him with one of her knives in hand. There is a duality here with both twins sneaking up on their enemies with knives, but this is an inconsistency for May. So last we heard, May was going undercover with the Jedi after backing out of surrendering herself to the Jedi, after backing out of killing the Jedi. It is possible, most recently, when she had her altercation with Osha, that May had changed motivation off-screen and is back on her revenge quest, but if that is the case, it isn't clear why she didn't just murder Sol while he was unconscious on the ground. If May's new goal is to infiltrate the Jedi Order by disguising herself as Osha, it's also unclear how killing Sol is going to forward that objective. Sol tells May to take the wheel and she obliges. She conceals her knife instead of attacking him. So now we have a definitive third motivation swap from May, but this is maybe the 5th or 6th conflict in her actions from episode 4 until now. May reflecting on what happened to her when she was tested on the Jedi ship might be driving her to this surge of anger, but she isn't reflecting on her family dying, she's reflecting on the Jedi testing her, so it isn't really clear if this is supposed to be the intent with the scene. And again, May's expressions or body language do not betray her emotional state. Sol proceeds down into the ship, and he slams a console with tears in his eyes, expressing his anguish over losing his team. Basil is fucking around with the pip droid. On Unknown Planet, Osha watches Kimmer undress and bathe himself, still clutching the knife. We see a large winding scar on Kimmer's back. Several shots in this scene linger on Kimmer's naked body, reflecting Osha's gaze. Kimmer's dialogue focuses on Osha's feelings and about the relationship between student and teacher. On Sol's ship, Sol hugs May, thanking her for saving him, still thinking May is Osha. He does not appear to notice the mark on Osha's forehead, obscured by her bangs. On Coruscant, Master Vernestra is having a conversation with a senator via hologram about a potential external review of the Jedi Order that is soon to be approved. She hangs up the call and is told that Sol's message has come through, communicating casualties for his entire team. Vernestra commands a search party be sent to Kofar. Vernestra continues to embody the corruption of the Jedi, having a backdoor conversation with a politician to avoid external forces reviewing the Jedi. While conversing with the senator, the lights in the room are turned off, emphasizing the covert nature of what she's doing. Kimmer and Osha engage in some more question and answer dialogue on the beach. He reveals that he was trained by the Jedi a long time ago, long enough that Osha would not have heard of him. This is another mystery about Kimmer's origin, as he does not appear to be that much older than Osha. Osha threatens that Sol will come looking for her, and that his strength in the Force is very powerful. Kimmer corrects her, telling her that Sol's strength is actually Osha's strength in the Force, and that somebody should teach her that. It is unclear what Kimmer means by this. This exchange is a continuation of Kimmer's wish to have a pupil from episode 5, and possibly the beginning of an attempt to groom Osha into that pupil. He gestures to his ship, saying that Osha must start swimming now if she wants to make it to the ship before sundown. Osha does not do this. She follows Kimmer instead. This scene appears to incite doubt for Osha and inspire her curiosity about Kimmer. Similar to episode 2, the sets are not designed around the script, or the script was not written to accommodate the action in the scene. When Kimmer tells Osha she needs to start swimming now to make it to the ship before sundown, the nearest rocks to shore appear about 50 meters away. If the intent with these lines is that Osha is still distrusting of Kimmer but curious, it would force her hand to staying the night if swimming to the ship seemed like an unsafe or drastic option. The layout of the set does not communicate this information, so Osha's decision to stay is solely motivated by curiosity and lust. Osha's motivations have now become muddied, similar to May. After having watched several Jedi be killed, including her friends Yord and Jackie Lon, it would seem that Osha's main goal would be to get away from Kimmer, but she does not take her opportunity to escape. Osha's curiosity and sexual desire appear to run deeper than her fear of Kimmer or her loyalty to Sol. May engages in some slapstick comedy. Osha and May have now fully switched places, both in their company and their clothes, but also with their tools. Osha with the kunai knives, and May with the pip droid. Kimmer tries to convince Osha that her understanding of the Force is incomplete, pushing her to lose her temper and admit that she failed in her Jedi training. On Coruscant, Vernestra opts to join the search party for Sol, despite finding hyperspace unsettling. The exchange with a younger Jedi is constructed as a joke at Vernestra's expense. Perhaps her sickness is an element that will be paid off later. On his ship, Sol confides in May that he could not sense Kimmer's intentions when they first met. May suggests that Sol's mind was clouded by wanting something too badly, giving some explanation as to why Sol is not able to immediately sense that May is not Osha, and possibly other gaps in Sol's mind-reading ability. They exchange some dialogue that reflects on how they feel about Osha. May asks Sol if he has been honest about what happened on Brendok, and Sol is about to tell her, but the power comes back on, and May walks away quickly to send a transmission to the Jedi. Sol shoots May with a stunner from behind, knocking her unconscious. Sol does this and says, "Oh, May," revealing that he knows it's May and not Osha. Sol deactivates his transponder on his ship and jumps into hyperspace. In the same shot, Vernestra's ship arrives near Kofar. On Planet Unknown, Kimmer reveals to Osha that he wants the power of two. This is a reference to the Sith tradition of always having a master and an apprentice, as described by Yoda in the end of The Phantom Menace.
Always two there are. No more, no less. A master and an apprentice.
This is also possibly a callback to the witch's chant.
Power of one, the power of two, the power of many.
Osha asks about Kimmer's scar. Kimmer says that it was given to him by someone who threw him away. The implication here is that it was his Jedi Master that gave it to him. Kimmer encourages Osha to try on his sensory deprivation helmet, which also blocks out other Jedi's force powers or mind reading, and also disables lightsabers on contact, and also works as a voice modulator. On Kofar, Vernestra and the search party discover the bodies of Yor, Jeki, and the other nameless Jedi that Kimmer killed. The young Jedi describes his interpretation of the fight as one combatant against many, his power extraordinary, his skills erratic. During this description, the camera centers on Vernestra's face. Vernestra kills a giant beetle with a lightsaber whip. The young Jedi asks about the possibility that Sol is responsible for the carnage, and Vernestra does not dissuade this suspicion. It is not stated how the search party is able to locate the site of this fight from Episode 5 without either Kimmer or Basil. So either Vernestra knew where Kilnaka lived all this time and chose not to tell Sol, or this is simply a continuity error. It's not a large continuity error, but the show does establish that Kilnaka's house is nigh impossible to find. The shape of Kimmer's scar matching Vernestra's unique lightsaber, the camera focusing on Vernestra during the description of Kimmer's fighting style, Vernestra concealing the truth on Kofar and throughout the show, and this scene on Kofar taking place directly after Kimmer speaking about how he received his scar, are all ways that the narrative is pointing to Vernestra as Kimmer's previous Jedi Master and possibly the true villain of the story. Osha tries on Kimmer's helmet and the episode ends on a black screen with her distorted breathing. Again, we have an episode containing inconsistencies for the main characters. From episodes 4 through 6, May changes her goals a number of times. May decides to abandon her 16 years long revenge quest and surrender to the Jedi. Then she tries to kill Jackie Lon, which does not align with surrendering to the Jedi. May then talks to Osha and wants to walk away from all of it and be with her sister, which is a new direction from trying to kill Jackie Lon. When Osha declines this offer, May knocks Osha unconscious, swaps their clothes, and goes undercover with Sol. Once on Sol's ship, May pulls a knife and sneaks up behind him, but then follows his orders, seeming to change her mind again in the space of one scene. This is 3 overt motivation changes and 6 conflicting actions since episode 4. We can say objectively that May's character motivation is inconsistent. At this point in the narrative, it cannot be said with certainty what May wants, what her objectives are, or what keeps her going in the story. If we ask why about any of the choices she's made in the last 3 episodes, we can only speculate and invent our own reasons. Osha is faring similarly. Osha appears overcome with curiosity and desire. It would aid in the sense that Osha is stuck here, listening to Kimmer's advances, if swimming to the ship was not a reasonable consideration, but the location or set for Planet Unknown does not convey this, making Osha's motivation more inconsistent. Sol is still putting off his big reveal that has been teased since episode 2. It has been established that even before the flashback, we do not have the full story of what happened on Brendok, but every time we come close to a character telling Osha or May the truth, something interrupts them. In the case of Sol, or they speak in unspecific riddles in the case of Kimmer.
You trust him? Even after everything he did to you.
Alluding to the mystery of Brendok this frequently is hinging the tension on the big reveal, likely that the Jedi burnt down the Coven or were somehow responsible for the death of the witches. I talked about this before, but this is a risky way to structure a narrative, because if the mystery is too predictable, audiences may not enjoy the surprise at the end, but if it's too obtuse, it may feel as though the mystery wasn't fair or solvable. A workaround to this problem that many strong mystery stories employ is to be defined by characters and the character conflicts. Osha and May having unclear motivations throughout the show puts the focus of the story on the resolution of our mysteries, especially those surrounding Sol and Kimmer. So the big questions going into the final episodes are not, what are Osha or May going to do, but are instead, what actually happened at the Coven, how was Sol involved, who is Kimmer, what is Kimmer trying to prove by killing a Jedi without a weapon, etc. All of the scenes in episode 6 are a series of question and answer dialogue that don't move the plot much. They provide backstory and mystery, and give some motivation for Kimmer, and lay a little bit of groundwork for Osha's character to have a change to the dark side going into the end of the season, but this is all communicated in dialogue. No actions are taken in this episode that advance the story. Subjectively, this episode gives us more questions than answers, which makes it feel like filler, especially given how close we are to the end of the season. Much of the runtime here is dedicated to building more mystery on top of the mysteries we already have, and character moments have no emotional weight because we don't have any context for these people's feelings. The best example of this is Osha's emotional outburst when she admits to have failed her Jedi training. Ostensibly, this is supposed to be a big emotional moment, but we've never seen her display insecurity about becoming a Jedi, or what the Jedi training was like for her. There's no emotional connection between this outburst and what we know about how Osha feels. Yord tells Osha in episode 1 that she had a tough time in Jedi training, and Sol remarks that he wasn't the best teacher, but this doesn't show us a deep-seated anger or fear of rejection that might manifest when Kimmer pushes her. This emotional outburst comes out of nowhere, and it isn't set up in the story prior to this or in any of the events or actions pertaining to Osha's character. On top of the show building towards Sol's big reveal, we now have the mystery of Kimmer's backstory, the mystery of Vernestra's involvement, and the mystery of how Osha's dark side turn will be justified. Nothing gets resolved in this episode, but the show keeps piling on more questions instead of resolving plot threads in preparation for a finale. The possible continuity error in Vernestra finding Kelnaka's house on Kofar and conflicting ideas about set design on Planet Unknown are not what I consider to be large problems, but the show mentions them specifically, and I'm trying to be thorough. You might think I'm nitpicking by mentioning these things, but the show thoroughly establishes that Kelnaka's home is difficult to find. Kimmer talks about how Kelnaka was hard to find. May talks about how Kelnaka is hard to find. The locals on the planet don't know where he is. Sol and Yord have to use a badger tracker to find him. I don't consider this a nitpick. 4 different reinforcements of a concept in one episode makes it fair to say that this is an important element, so it's strange that Vernestra finds Kelnaka's home without the usage of any of the tools that the other characters had to use. Vernestra's Jedi assistant is questioning the locals, presumably about Sol, but it is established that those locals don't know the location of Kelnaka.
The locals say he ventured off into the forest and never came back.
To our knowledge, the transponder that alerts the Jedi to Sol's location is located on Sol's ship, not on his person, which could explain how Vernestra's ship landed in the exact same place as Sol's, but it doesn't explain how Vernestra knew where specifically in the jungle Sol had been. It is possible that the reason for Vernestra finding Kelnaka's home is yet to be revealed. Maybe she really did know this all along. It is established in episode 4 that Vernestra knows that Kelnaka is on Kofar, and presumably they have some way to communicate with him. Vernestra is instructing that Kelnaka be removed from Kofar, which doesn't happen, so it is unclear whether or not they actually have communications with him. And if they did have comms with Kelnaka, and Vernestra does know where Kelnaka is specifically on Kofar, then why doesn't she tell Sol and Yord and let them use the Gopher Tracker Badger thing to find him? If there is no explanation ever given, though, I am very confident calling this a continuity error at best, and at worst, a neglected story cul-de-sac in the writing that goes nowhere and doesn't need to be included at all. By far the biggest issue I have is that these main characters continue to feel like bystanders in their own story. May and Osha have nothing keeping them here, nothing driving them to participate in the plot. It makes the show feel empty and impossible to relate to or understand the characters. If we start asking why questions about Osha or May, we find that any answers are absent and they have to be invented by the audience to justify their actions. For example, why doesn't Osha swim to the ship to get away from Kimmer? The only answers the show provides are that Osha is infatuated with Kimmer. Osha apparently liked her friends Yord and Jeki Lon, but when confronting their murderer, she can't decide what to do. She doesn't even take the opportunity to leave Planet Unknown when the ship is only a short swim away. If you, in real life, saw a person murder all of your friends with a sword, how long would you stick around and watch them bathe? I can only speak for myself, but even in the case of Manny Jacinto, I don't think I'd be there for very long. The result of Osha getting caught up talking to Kimmer for this long, despite having a clear way out, makes it impossible for me to understand what is supposed to be going on with her character. It's fine that she doesn't want to kill him. The show establishes that she doesn't condone killing in revenge or using weapons on unarmed opponents, but this doesn't explain why she stays on Planet Unknown when an operational, hyperspace-capable ship is about 50 meters away. She has an emotional outburst later when Osha cries out that she has failed in reference to her Jedi training, but as I said, We've never seen her Jedi training, what it was like for her, or how she might be feeling about it. I do not know what we as the audience are supposed to be feeling in that moment, because I know almost nothing about this character's emotional path as it relates to this point in the story. May has the exact same problem as Osha, and she's a tourist in the story. She changes her entire reason for being at least 3 times, and maybe even 6 times, depending on how far you read into those actions. In this episode alone, she goes from being about to kill Sol to not killing Sol and helping to fix the power on the ship. When she asks Sol directly about Brendok, she doesn't even wait for an answer. She rushes to the communications console to send a message to the Jedi. I have no idea why she does this. Instead of waiting to hear Sol's confession, she runs away, prolonging the mystery for another episode. I do not know what May wants. I do not know how May thinks. I could not tell you a single thing about her personality other than that she is bloodthirsty and inconsistent. The show is allergic to scenes of either main character reflecting on how the moments of this story affect them. We don't get to see how May feels being on the ship that reminds her of the death of her whole family. Her face doesn't change. She has no lines about it. She doesn't display any emotion whatsoever. If her next action, drawing a knife on Sol, is supposed to be in response to that, there needs to be a connection drawn here between these moments. I'm willing to accept that that is a why, and then Sol's voice brings her back to reality, and she realizes that she shouldn't kill him in this moment. But why? Why is she undercover with them then? What's going on? I am not comfortable calling Stenberg a bad actress. I haven't seen her body of work, but there's no clear direction for these lead characters either in the filming or the writing, and it leaves both Osha and May with no distinct personality or motivations or emotions. This actress may go on to be remembered fondly. I know how drastically the perception of Hayden Christensen has changed over the years, but let's just say for now that the direction for Stenberg has not been emotive. I'm starting to feel like a broken record, bringing this point up at the end of each episode, but each episode there's more examples of these characters either being inconsistent or unmotivated, and it's dragging the story down that does have some good ideas. So on a more positive note, Sol is still well characterized. He gets a quiet scene where we see exactly how he feels about losing his entire team, which gives emotional context about how he feels towards Kimmer if they meet again. And not to glaze him too hard, but independent of the writing and his characterization, Lee Jong-jae is going for it in these scenes. Manny Jacinto's menace is gone here in favor of seducing Osha, and the camera lays on the female gaze stuff pretty thick, which is strange given how recently Osha watched this guy slaughter her friends. But Jacinto's performance is communicating what I believe to be the intent of these scenes, jarring as it is. Vernestra is thoroughly demonstrated to be a villainous character with her backdoor political dealings and her general demeanor towards her fellow Jedi. Her character is abrasive and condescending. If this is the intent with her character, it is effective, and the performance from Rebecca Henderson is appropriately unlikable and insecure. I know a lot of this whole video has been fairly negative so far. I really did want to inject some positivity about the aspects of the show that I think are working. Most of this analysis is concerned with plot and narrative construction, and on that front, the show is not succeeding in terms of what I am interpreting to be the goals of the story. That doesn't mean there's nothing of value here. Obviously, there are things about the show that I do quite like. This has been a nice way of saying that that's all the positive things I have to say about the episode, and the rest of this is pretty much all negatives. So Osha refers to the Jedi do not attack the unarmed adage again in this episode as her reason not to kill Kimmer. Obviously, there is a gulf of difference between somebody being unarmed and somebody being innocent or helpless, but it feels like this show thinks it's somehow implicit in Star Wars canon that the Jedi live by these words, but it doesn't track with what we've seen even in this show. 2 examples would be Yord pulling his saber on Kimmer in the apothecary, Sol pulling his saber on an unarmed Kimmer and having to be stopped by Osha, and Sol slicing a beetle in half. Was the beetle armed? What are the rules here? I don't mean to be pedantic about this, but so much of this narrative has been built around the specific phrasing with the word armed that I'm not going to just ignore it. Kimmer is a powerful force user. If he starts force choking Osha, does that count as armed? Isn't he technically armed all the time if he can kill people with his mind? There needed to be clarification for this idea early in the story. Maybe a specific line or a moment from Indara or Sol that we could build on. They attempt to set this up in the opening fight of episode 1, but it doesn't answer any questions, and it doesn't get any more nuanced than Jedi do not attack the unarmed. If the whole point of this through line is that the Jedi only pretend to live by this code, but it's a lie, and the big reveal is that Jedi killed the unarmed witches on Brendok, that won't make the unarmed thing make more sense. It would ensure smoother story continuity if the Jedi's unarmed code was an element that received more attention if it is going to be baked into the climax of the season. To play screenwriter again, it would clean up the ambiguity around the unarmed rules if we were introduced to this concept earlier, and some of the audience questions could be addressed right away. Like when Sol is instructing the younglings, he could be making a point to them that the Jedi never attack someone that doesn't have a weapon. And then a youngling could ask him, what happens if someone uses the Force on them? And then maybe Sol could say something like, that's not possible. Only the Jedi can use the Force, young one. Power in the wrong hands can be very dangerous. This would answer the audience's question about the rules by stating that the Jedi are unprepared to handle an unarmed yet dangerous threat. This would also plant a seed about the Jedi thinking they're the only ones who should be allowed to use the Force and hint at their justifications to ensure a monopoly on Force power. There are many ways that the script could have made the Jedi do not attack the unarmed thing more clear. It seems like the implication is that this idea is a lie that the Jedi tell themselves, but the rule appears to come and go with the situation, and it doesn't provide clarity as to why May is expected to kill a Jedi unarmed, and what that would mean for Kimmer or for the Jedi. Kimmer says in the beginning that to kill a Jedi without a weapon is to kill their dream, implying that their belief system and self-propagated lies would be dismantled by subverting their rules of engagement. But why? How does this work? What does it prove if you can kill a Jedi without a weapon? What belief are you tearing down by doing that? Perhaps there are answers for these questions going into the finale, but as it is, it's just a phrase and has no weight in the story at all. Oh man, this is a long one. Going into the final 2 episodes, my concern is that the writing is overly occupied with building up these mysteries rather than developing conflict or motivation for our leads. Unfortunately, it's pretty late in the show at this point, and I would be surprised to see meaningful course correction at this stage. Episode 7, Choice. We open on Brendok 16 years earlier. This entire episode is also a flashback, similar to episode 3 and in the same place at the same time. Sol, Kilnaka, Torben, and Indara are taking samples of moss and using other instruments to take readings of the ground. In explaining their mission here, they talk about a force vergence, which is a concentration of force energy centered around a location that could create life, which might be an explanation for the lush forests and animal life on Brendok. Sol says that this is a power that should be studied and protected, and that nothing could be more important to the Jedi, although he does not explain why. It can be discerned from this line, and combined with what Qui-Gon Jinn and Yoda are talking about in The Phantom Menace, that a vergence in the Force is rare, but is a documented phenomenon.
I've encountered a vergence in the Force.
A vergence, you say?
The next day, Indara and Sol are discussing Torben. Indara tells Sol that he was disturbed the previous night, and that she teaches Torben to seek answers instead of telling them to him, and because Sol disagrees with this strategy, that's why he does not have a Padawan. The purpose of this exchange could be in reference to Sol's alleged shortcomings as a teacher, something that he alluded to in conversation with Osha in episode 2. It is unclear what Indara means by saying that Sol was disturbed. Sol's demeanor and dialogue around the campfire is calm. Nothing in the scene suggests that Sol has a problem with their mission on Brendok, unlike Torben, who longs for purpose and to return to Coruscant. We do a scene from episode 3, but shot from Sol's perspective, of Sol following Osha and May back to their fortress home. Sol can't gain access through the front door, so he scales the sides of the fortress just in time to watch the force-pushing demonstration with Mother Anastasia and the twins. What we see of the scene is the same as in episode 3, but shot from Sol's perspective. Sol watches some of the witches conduct some kind of ritual over the pit in the cliffside, where the ascension ceremony is soon to take place. It is possible that this pit is the site of the Vergence that Indara spoke of. Indara had said that a Vergence is centered around a location, and this is the same location that the witches used to conduct their ascension ceremony. Back at camp, Sol is telling his fellow Jedi about the witches. Indara uses the term Force Cult, and Torben chips in to suggest that they might be Night Sisters. Indara corrects him that Night Sisters do not raise younglings, let alone train them. So this exchange sets a precedent for there to have been other Night Sisters in the galaxy, enough to be a known entity, but nobody's tone or body language communicates anything about how the Jedi might feel about Night Sisters. Sol raises concerns for Osha and May, saying that the witches do not treat the girls like children. He says he fears for the girls' safety, that the witches are preparing for a ceremony that night. From what we have seen from Sol's perspective in this episode, it isn't clear how he knows the witches are preparing for a ceremony that night, unless the ritual that we see over the hole in the ground is a known Night Sister ceremony preparation and he's making an educated guess. There are not lines of dialogue from the witches that reference the ascension ceremony that Sol is present to have heard. We see him arrive on the scene of the Force Push demonstration in time to see the push happen, so if he receives further information than that, it happens off-screen. Sol's line about fearing for the girl's safety could be motivated by watching Anastasia push the children to the ground, but he does not reference this when he speaks to Indara. He only voices concern because of the imminent ceremony. As for his line about not treating the twins like children, it is possible this is in reference to the Force pushing, but he is not specific. The same as episode 3, the Jedi have their audience with Mother Anastasia and the witches. This time, the scene is inviting us into Torben's perspective instead of the twins' perspective. The big difference here is that now we get to see what is going on in Torben's head when he gets mind-controlled by Mother Anastasia. After this, we cut back to Sol's ship, where Indara stands over a seated Torben, whose head is low in shame. Their body language suggests that Indara had just finished scolding Torben, but no words are actually exchanged. Sol expresses an interest in Osha. He believes he senses a connection and that she is meant to be his Padawan. Sol says he believes that Osha wants to leave with the Jedi, but Indara tells him not to confuse what he wants with what Osha wants. This is sort of a continuation of Indara's lines after the campfire scene, where she accuses Sol of confusing Torben's feelings with his own. May is given the Jedi test and fails on purpose. May also reveals that she and Osha are to be marked to become the leaders of the Coven. She ends the scene on a foreboding line.
Mama said, everyone must walk through fear. Everyone must be sacrificed to fulfill their destiny.
In this version of Osha having her Jedi test, the focus is now on Indara, who appears wary of Sol's tactics. Torben runs the twins' blood samples. Sol and Indara argue over the merits of bringing Osha back to be a Jedi, but the argument is interrupted by Torben announcing the blood test results. He describes the twins' M count as being extremely high. This is in reference to the concentration of metachlorians in a person's bloodstream that are used to measure force potential.
I've been wondering, what are midichlorians?
Midichlorians are a microscopic life form that resides within all living cells.
They live inside me.
Inside your cells, yes. And we are symbionts with them.
Symbionts?
Life forms living together for mutual advantage. Without the midichlorians, life could not exist, and we would have no knowledge of the Force. They continually speak to us, telling us the will of the Force.
Torben says that the symbionts are the same, and that even normal identical twins would have different symbionts, but that Osha and May's symbionts are identical. The three of them theorize that this is not possible without manipulation, and therefore the twins must have been created artificially, perhaps using a power great enough to split a consciousness into two bodies. Sol says that only a Vergence could create this type of power. Upon hearing this, Torben jumps out of his seat and mounts a speeder bike. He says that the girls are proof of a Vergence and that is his ticket back to Coruscant. Sol gives chase, and Indara and Kilnaka follow with the ship. Osha and May are having their argument, they're separated. We see again Osha's final admission to Anasea that she wants to be a Jedi, and Anasea acknowledging that they have to have a meeting about it, but that Osha's feelings will be considered. In a scene new to this episode, Mother Coral is forcefully walking May through a hallway. Coral asks if May wants to stop Osha from leaving. May nods and Coral says, then stop her. She shoves May to the ground, saying that the Jedi will not warn you before they attack, and then stabs and swings at May with her staff. May blocks these attacks with the Force, and Coral says, quote, good girl, get mad, unquote, and May runs off. This scene indicates that Coral was the one that pushed May into taking drastic measures to ensure that Osha cannot leave. Shoving May to the ground and then attacking her is further examples of physical abuse, expanding on what we saw in episode 3. Again, this event is not characterized as abuse by the reactions from May or from the witches in the courtyard that witness it. Anasea convenes with her advisors, who are all against letting Osha go with the Jedi. Anasea places priority on what Osha wants, but lines from her advisors imply that their future hinges on Osha staying with the Coven, saying that she has yet to discover the power she holds. Meanwhile, May smashes the control panel to the front door of the fortress with a metal pipe, and she announces to the courtyard of witches that no one gets in or out. Coral stands beside her, telling the witches to arm themselves. Outside, Torben tells Sol that the elevator is not functioning, that the girls have been locked inside. Sol puts a hand to his head, and he has a vision of May telling Osha that they're stuck there. Because of this, he leads Torben up the side of the fortress, like how he got inside in the beginning of the episode. In the courtyard, the witches prepare for battle. Anasea says to Coral, quote, I told you we cannot use violence, unquote. And Coral tells Anasea, quote, and I told you I would die before I let the Jedi take my children, unquote. The wording here implies that this is a situation the two have discussed before, and implies a history with the Jedi. Anasea does not instruct the witches to disarm or lay down their weapons. Sol and Torben come face to face with Anasea and Coral. Sol tells them that he has noble intentions. He asks Anasea where the twins came from and how they were created. Anasea does not answer him, but she says that the Jedi's noble intentions will someday destroy every Jedi in the galaxy. A possibly prophetic line which could be a reference to the events of the prequel trilogy, in which most of the Jedi in the galaxy were killed. However, the Jedi were not killed in the prequels due to their noble intentions. They were betrayed by a Sith Lord and a politician who had installed a backdoor command into a clone army that turned the Republic military clones upon the Jedi Order with a single command. The intent with Anasea's line is clearly a threat, but its predictive ability in reference to the Star Wars timeline is less obvious. If the line is specifically referring to Anakin's fall to the dark side, driven by a desire to save his wife, then it is more accurate as a prediction. In response to this threat, Torben takes his lightsaber off his belt, and Sol cautions him, and the witches all tense up. May runs into the room and calls for her mother. Sol extends a hand out, calling Osha's name. It appears that Sol is so focused on the prospect of recovering Osha that he mistakes May for her sister. The action shifts into slow motion. Perhaps seeing Sol's attachment to Osha, Mother Coral lowers herself into a combative stance. Torben draws his lightsaber, and Anasea cries, "No!" Her eyes go all black, and she dissipates into black smoke, which is drawn towards May. May as well begins to dissipate into smoke, but Sol, seeing what he thinks is Osha in danger, draws his lightsaber and thrusts it into the center of the smoke where Anasea used to be. Anasea rematerializes, her eyes return to normal, and she is impaled on the lightsaber. She tells Sol with her dying breath that she was going to let Osha go, because it's what she wants. Anasea collapses dead to the floor. May shakes her dead mother, distraught. She looks up at Sol, her forehead mark illuminated. Sol seems to realize in that moment that he made a mistake and mixed up the twins. The witches fire arrows at Torben, who blocks them. Coral attacks Sol with her staff, and he doesn't fight back, only blocking her most dangerous attacks, perhaps too upset or too guilty to fight back. Coral turns to black smoke and disappears. Torben and Sol look around and see that the other witches have also disappeared. They hear Coral's voice around them. "You should not have brought him here." Torben says that his mind is fortified, but Coral's voice says, "Not you," and Kilnaka the Wookiee is standing near the Virgin's Pit. Kilnaka draws his lightsaber. Cut to the witches in their meeting room, their eyes are all black as well, swaying in unison, and it appears that they are manipulating Kilnaka to fight Sol and Torben. Kilnaka makes short work of Sol and Torben, being far physically stronger. He gives Torben cuts on his face that match the scars we see in episode 2, and Dara shows up and leaps on Kilnaka using the force to release him from the witch's mind control spell. The witches collapse where they sit, either unconscious or dead. Coral is not among the bodies. May and Osha meet up on a broken bridge and have their last scene from episode 3, but a little bit longer. The addition here is Sol's perspective, where he uses the force to try to save both girls, but is unable to, ultimately choosing Osha. So, when face to face with both girls, he can tell them apart. I'm joking. The girls are saying each other's names out loud several times, so he knows which one is which. On the way back to Coruscant, Indara and Sol have a quick altercation, Indara expressing her displeasure that Sol and Torben went against her orders. Indara says that they will tell the council the truth, that May burned down the witch's fortress and everyone was lost. Sol says he has to face the council, but Indara tells him not to, that doing so would destroy Osha's dream to be trained as a Jedi, on top of the loss of her family. When Osha asks what happened, Sol gets the nod from Indara and tells her that May started a fire, and that's where the episode ends. Here in episode 7, some mysteries are solved that have been hanging over the story since the beginning. We learn what actually happened on Brendok and why Sol feels so guilty about it. He killed Anastasia and then lied about it to Osha at the encouragement of Indara. We learn how Osha and May were created, or at least how the Jedi theorize they were created. It is proposed that the witches split one consciousness into two bodies using the power of the virgins. This episode also expands on the theme of the corruption of the Jedi. Indara is willing to cover up the truth about what happened so that Osha can achieve her dream of being a Jedi. Indara's motivation appears more kind than what we see Vernestra doing in the present, but the action is similar. There are multiple lines from Indara to Sol about not confusing other people's feelings for his own. In the end of the episode, Anastasia tells Sol that he was right about Osha's desire to become a Jedi. Sol is emotionally attached to Osha and the idea of taking her on as a Padawan. This leads him to be manipulative in convincing Osha to join the Jedi. The sum of these exchanges blurs the meaning of what Indara was saying and what Sol was feeling. It is possible that Sol is seeing what he wants to see, that the mission on Brendok is not particularly noble, and that Osha does not want to be a Jedi, but he's guided by his feelings instead of assessing the situation objectively. On the other hand, Indara never corrects Sol about the nobility of their mission to Brendok, and it turns out that Osha really did want to be a Jedi. So it's ambiguous as to whether Sol is actually wrong, or if he is correct and just overly emotionally attached. It could be that Sol is deliberately ambiguous, and his concern for Osha is genuine, his noble intentions leading to disaster in the end. The motivations for Sol, Coral, Torben, and Indara are all well communicated. Coral hates Jedi as established and has threatened violence before. Torben wants to go home and will take drastic steps to secure a reason to leave Brendok. Indara wishes to follow the instructions of the Council, and she's frustrated with Sol for disobeying her. In episode 7, May is shown to have been a witness to her mother's murder, and an active participant in the resistance to the Jedi, which informs her emotional state at the beginning of this show. Osha does not have any unique scenes in this episode, but now we know that the sisters had seen different sides of the Jedi as children. The action of episode 7 is often out of step with what is happening in the story. The witches arm themselves and May disables the front entrance long before the Jedi come back. The first hint of the Jedi coming back to the fortress is when Indara flies over the courtyard in the Jedi ship. One of the witches says that the Jedi have breached the fortress again, but this is not accurate to what we've been shown.
Prepare for battle.
What is happening? The Jedi have breached the fortress again.
When this line is said, Torben and Sol are scaling the exterior. Indara and Kilnaka are overhead in their ship and have not yet been revealed or seen. But the witches have already armed themselves before any of this happened. From the witches' perspective, The Jedi have not breached anything, and the witches have no reason to suspect that the Jedi will take Osha by force. Similar to Coral's lines about her wariness of the Jedi, this is sort of an implication of a long history between the witches and the Jedi, but not one that we get to see, and the show does not expand on this. When we get to the fight in the courtyard, Anastasia knows that Sol has come back for Osha and is critical of that decision. But she doesn't admit that she's going to let Osha go until she's already been stabbed. Anastasia here has the opportunity to avoid conflict, but instead she chooses to make veiled threats, which escalates the situation. Once Anastasia is stabbed by Sol, it takes 45 seconds for the Archer witches or Coral to react and start attacking Sol and Torben. And this scene is interrupted by a quick cut to Osha escaping her room, so it might be longer than that. There is a cutaway to Coral 26 seconds after Anastasia is stabbed, where she looks upset, but she doesn't move for another 20 seconds. All this to say, the action in this scene does not convey any sense of urgency with how long Coral and the witches take to react to Anastasia's death. If you're curious, the timestamps for this are at the 28:51 and 29:37, with the cutaway of Coral at 29:17. The expanded explanations about the origins for Osha and May suggest that the girls are literally identical, like the same person identical. This might not actually be true, but the implication from Torben's explanation of the symbionts is that the girls are more identical than real twins could ever be. This raises questions about why the children are played by a pair of similar looking but not identical twins. But as adults, the sisters are played by the same actress. This revelation makes the girls' poem literal, the always one but born as two thing. When Sol confuses May for Osha in the courtyard, it could be the intention of the scene that the twins are supposed to look exactly alike, and he is guessing at their names incorrectly since he's invested in Osha, but this doesn't make as much sense since they are played by visibly different people. If it is the case that the girls were intended to look exactly alike in all stages of life, then from a production standpoint, it is easier to cast twin girls than it is to design the scenes around only showing one of their faces at a time, like what they do in the end of episode 5, and it is cheaper than replacing one of the faces with special effects in every scene or filming every scene twice with one actress. The whole thing with the twins not being actually identical is probably just a budgetary workaround for the production team, but it comes at the cost of making two people that are supposed to be literally identical look not identical. Subjectively, I know this is a pretty long one, Episode 7 should have probably just replaced Episode 3 and only withholding key details as reveals for later on. There is very little new information revealed to us that contributes plot or character development. Too much of the information in Episode 3 is not recontextualized with this new perspective to justify rewatching entire scenes. Episodes 3 and 7 in this show are trying to do a Rashomon thing where we learn about an event from different characters' perspectives and how that different perspective can shape a person's reality. But that isn't really what's happening here. We're more just being given more information, and some characters' perspectives are omitted entirely in Episode 7. I know I say this after every episode, but Osha and May are still underdeveloped, and the placement of Episode 7 does the same thing to the narrative that Episode 3 did. It breaks up important character moments so that we don't get more buildup as to what May and Osha are doing or feeling in Episode 6. We only learned that what Sol was guilty of specifically was stabbing Mother Anastasia, although given what we see in this episode, he wasn't necessarily wrong for taking this action. We knew it was something, now we know exactly what. Episode 7 in a vacuum is about the same quality as Episode 3. My issue is more with the placement of this episode, and that taking another extended hiatus from moving the plot forward detracts from my investment in that main plot and the main characters and their journeys in the present day. The new information that we get in this flashback does not change the stakes of the narrative in the present. It only fills in the small gaps of our knowledge. The last thing we saw Osha do in the present was lose her temper and foreshadow a possible turn to the dark side. Episode 7 does not give us more context for this. In fact, Osha has no original lines in this episode. meaning that we have now taken a 40-minute break from developing the main character. I talked a bit about how long it takes for Coral and the witches to react to Anasea's death. Those were objective observations, but subjectively, taking 46 seconds to get angry makes the scene feel slow and even kind of silly in what is supposed to be a tragic and formative moment for Sol and May. And so we're clear, the amount of seconds counted there starts after the slow motion, so there's no distortion in how long it takes. Thematically, this episode works for me as portraying morally upstanding but flawed Jedi. Even their transgressions here are rooted in nobility. As a narrative about how the road to hell is paved with good intentions, it would flow better if this theming was set up early in the season and then focusing the story on the journey for these main characters and their choices. As it is, structuring the whole season around a big Rashomon-style reveal moment instead of the main characters requires the writing to toe a fine line of withholding details about this specific mystery so that the audience is kept in suspense. Only you can decide if this reveal is an effective moment for you. This episode's big reveal is that Sol killed Anastasia and lied about it. The rest is fan service. We get more witch powers, we get a Wookiee lightsaber fight, and we lay down some more mystery. Those things are fine, and for my part, I think the witches being able to transform into smoke like Dracula and mind control people is really cool. The Wookiee fight is fun, although not as flashy as the fighting of Episode 5. Viscerally enjoyable as those elements are to me, they don't forward the story or enhance the characters in any new ways. We knew that Sol was carrying guilt over what happened. Learning why is just the cherry on top, but it doesn't alter our perspective of him, especially since what happened is not explicitly his fault. Sol had good reason to be concerned for Osha, and better reason to strike out at Anastasia in that moment. Even the visual coding of what Anastasia is doing here is straight up demonic. Any reasonable person might look to the child disappearing into smoke, and then look at the woman turning into a vampire, and assume that what she is doing is a bad thing. Now, this is exactly what I was speaking about earlier in the potential downfall of building the narrative around a mystery. Now that we know that May saw Sol kill her mother, it raises more questions about how she conducts herself in the present. Why doesn't May tell Osha what happened on Brendok when they have their conversation on Kofar in the end of Episode 5? Osha wasn't there to see the altercation. When May says, "They've brainwashed you," in the end of Episode 5, May doesn't elaborate at all. May knows that Osha wasn't there to see what happened, but she doesn't attempt to explain anything. May also makes small talk with Sol and helps him get the ship up and running. If this were any character other than Sol, it might not be strange for May to bide her time, but Sol is the murderer of her mother, and they make small talk about Osha's personality instead of doing anything. It has been difficult to discern May's motivations throughout the show, but the added context of Episode 7 makes her actions even more contradictory than they were. I said in my last subjective section that I was worried that the show was going to double down on mysteries and neglect the characters, and that's mostly what happens here. We even get a new mystery as to how specifically Osha and May were created using the Force Virgins, what their power was meant to symbolize for the Witch Coven, and how they were supposed to become the leader of the witches, also what it implies that May started to turn to smoke before Anastasia died, and what became of Mother Coral. I have to assume at this point that either the creators are betting on a Season 2 to provide payoff for all these ideas, and Kimmer, Osha, May, and Vernestra won't get to be very complex characters heading into the finale because the show has to end pretty soon without much time to develop them. While I do enjoy some of this action and the Force powers on display in Episode 7, I can't help but thinking that the season might flow better by making this the first episode and deleting Episode 3 entirely. Episode 8, The Acolyte. Osha is breathing slowly under Kimmer's helmet while Kimmer watches her. Osha contorts, panicking in her seat. When he lunges towards her, Kimmer is held in place. The light in the room is lowered, and we are shown that the lower lighting is in his mind and that his eyes have gone fully black, subject to the same mind control that Torben was subject to. He is able to move and lift the helmet off of Osha with difficulty, which sort of breaks the spell. Osha says that she had a vision. She saw May killing Sol, that she had a saber but didn't use it. Kimmer proclaims that this vision is of the future and that May can kill with no weapon. Osha says that the future is not fixed and she can stop May. Kimmer proposes that they both use Kimmer's ship to find May and see who gets to her first. As far as we know, Kimmer is still motivated to kill Sol and May to conceal his identity. This opening scene demonstrates that Osha has force abilities similar to her mother, but that she cannot fully control them. She also has a force connection with May that can reveal May's whereabouts and see certain actions in the future. Unless, of course, the vision that Osha is having is of herself, since she is wearing May's clothes. Osha's force connection to May was established in Episode 1 and guides the way in small moments, such as finding a shortcut in Episode 2, but nothing as substantial as predicting the future. On his ship, Sol is telling May that he's taking the Brak to Brendok to prove to the Jedi that there is a Force Vergence there. He says that May being alive is the proof of this Vergence, although he doesn't explain how. So if Sol had kept the records from the twins' blood tests when they were children, that could be proof of the Vergence, since it's what led the Jedi to believe in the Immaculate Force conception in the first place. This is also the first time that Sol has mentioned being motivated to prove the existence of the Vergence outside of the Episode 7 flashback. May and Sol argue over the Jedi's involvement on Brendok. Sol says that his biggest regret was being unable to save both Osha and May. Sol starts to explain that Osha and May aren't actually twins or even sisters, but he's interrupted by May escaping her restraints and tasing him in the chest. May escapes in a small shuttle, and Sol gives chase in his ship. May laments that the shuttle doesn't have hyperdrive. Sol has the shuttle in his console's target lock. He opens the cap on a switch and appears to hesitate. Before Sol can do anything, Basil, the tracker gopher, who is still here and has been on the ship the whole time, pulls open a small port on the wall and rips out some cabling. This causes a malfunction, which distracts Sol and the ship goes into a tumble. May, in the smaller ship, flip end over end towards Brendok, crash landing on the surface of the planet. The tumbling stops, but May never appears to gain full control over her ship at any point during this crash landing. The implication of Sol opening the targeting computer and uncapping a switch is that he is going to destroy May's ship. This does not align with his new motivation to prove the Vergence. If he is merely going to activate a tractor beam or some other non-lethal countermeasure to stop May from escaping, it is not implied by anything in this scene. Basil's hesitation while watching Sol and then subsequent intervention seems to imply that Sol was about to do a bad thing. How Basil intuits Sol's intent and why Basil intervenes on May's behalf is a mystery, since he attacked her once before and is aware that she isn't Osha. On Coruscant, Vernestra takes a meeting with the Senator, but not before sneaking in a jab at her fellow Jedi's incompetence. The Senator makes a remark about Vernestra having hyperspace sickness. This is the second time her sickness has been mentioned. The Senator questions Vernestra's unsanctioned murder investigation. Vernestra avoids a direct question about the identity of the murder suspect using some delicate phrasing.
I am very close to apprehending the suspect.
Is the suspect a Jedi?
Very close. Thank you for your concern.
The second very close could be read as an extension of Vernestra's previous line, which is what it sounds like in the delivery, but it could also be a reference to May or Kimmer if we interpret the second very close to be the answer to the question. The suspect is, in a sense, very close to being a Jedi.
From a certain point of view.
The Senator then delivers his unprompted and personal opinion on the Jedi. He believes they are an unchecked power posing as a religion, only feigning control over their emotions, and the entire organization is careening towards disaster. This speech could be viewed as a thematic summary of the Jedi in this show. It draws comparison to both Anakin Skywalker of the future and to Sol's actions in this story. The Senator also tells Vernestra that he has reported Vernestra's lack of transparency and to expect an invitation to a Senate tribunal. This scene is overtly describing what have so far only been implications in the story. There is lots of evidence in this show that the Senator is exactly correct. Sol, in particular, is emotional, and in pursuit of his goodness, Sol has killed people and lied about it. The Senator's comments directly address that the Jedi are deluding themselves about their ability to control their emotions. The events of this show disprove an incorrect belief that the Jedi hold, or in other words, kill their dream. Now, there is nothing in the presentation of the Senator or his lines to suggest a connection with Kimmer's speech at the end of Episode 1, but this does represent a sort of through line about dismantling the Jedi's belief structure. According to Kimmer, the incorrect belief that the Jedi hold is that the Jedi do not attack the unarmed. The Senator is saying that the Jedi are not actually able to control their emotions, which will lead to one of them snapping. The two ideas are not really related, but they are similar because they are being questioned. Before departing Planet Unknown, Kimmer propositions Osha to be trained. Osha refuses, the decision used to demonstrate that Osha and May are different. A mystery creature watches Kimmer's ship depart, teasing another character for later on, if this show gets greenlit for a season 2, which is not certain. Sol lands on Brendok, turns on his transponder, and meditates briefly before setting off to the fortress. On Coruscant, Vernestra is halfway through asking someone to pass along a message, despite the unusual circumstances. She is interrupted by her meek Jedi colleague telling her that Sol has been located. Vernestra tells the kid to assemble as many knights as he can without raising alarm. This scene is, again, Vernestra embodying corruption, asking for backdoor favors, and urging Jedi to operate in secret. Kimmer and Osha arrive on Brendok. Sol walks around the scene of the Ascension ceremony, calling out to May and reflecting on what happened there 16 years ago. May arrives on scene, and it would seem that she is very lucky in landing within walking distance of the fortress, given the size of the planet and her uncontrolled descent. Kimmer shows up and attacks Sol. Their fight takes them back into the courtyard. Osha confronts May in Osha's old room. May tells Osha that she'd been lied to, but Osha puts the blame on herself for being unable to accept what happened and to quell her own negative emotions. May tries to convince Osha that Sol is the reason for Osha's negative emotions, and Osha attacks her. During the fight, a women's choir rises as a musical theme, similar to the women's choir voices heard during the flashback episodes during the Ascension. While Sol and Kimmer are fighting, they see a Jedi ship coming into land. Kimmer remarks that they aren't here for him, implying that the Jedi are coming for Sol. During their fight, Sol strikes an anime pose, slicing open Kimmer's lightsaber hilt and disabling it. Kimmer takes off his helmet, May jumps into frame, wrestles with Sol and disarms him. Kimmer encourages May to kill Sol, but May throws the lightsaber aside, damaging it and revealing the crystal inside, saying that she wants Sol to confess for what he did. Sol says he wanted to protect Osha and May. May asks, protect from what? And Sol explains that the twins are not twins, but are the same person created by Mother Anastasia, and that such power is incredibly rare. It is unclear how the creation of Osha and May is related to Sol wanting to protect them, and he doesn't elaborate. This is a continuation of the mystery of the nature of the Ascension ceremony and the twins' roles in the Witch Coven, hinted at when May is describing the Ascension in Episode 7 and how Anastasia describes it in Episode 3. It implies that the ceremony might somehow result in sacrificing the twins, but it is not specific as to how. Sol confesses to killing Anastasia, and Osha emerges from the shadows.
I was protecting you. It was the right thing to do.
If it was the right thing to do, why didn't you tell the Jedi?
Without May, there was no proof you were created in this way.
Sol tells Osha that he kept all this a secret for her sake, and it sounds like he's about to say, I love you, but Osha force chokes him to death. While Osha does this, her skin touches the crystal inside the lightsaber, turning it from blue to red. Osha collapses to her knees. Kimmer cautiously reaches out to touch Osha's shoulder. She responds by slashing at him with the lightsaber. In her hand, the blade of the lightsaber turns from blue to red before their eyes. In this climactic scene for the Acolyte, Osha takes a substantial step towards the dark side by killing her former mentor and changing the color of the lightsaber with her touch. We see the death of Sol and his confession that the show has been hinting at and building towards since the first episode. Sol's motivation gets muddied here at the end of his screen time when he starts describing how there was no proof that the twins were created using the Force, and because there was no proof, he lied about what happened. This is not true. Sol lied to Osha to save Osha's feelings, and to the Council because Indara convinced him to. It is not clear if Sol is lying again to Osha about his motivations in his final moments, or if this is a continuity error. Sol establishes new motivation when talking to May earlier in this episode, saying that he needs May for proof of avergence. He then changes this motivation slightly when speaking to Osha, saying that he needed proof that the twins were created with the Force. The Virgins and the Immaculate Conception, while clearly related, are not the same thing. It was speculated in Episode 7 that a Virgins could be a means to create life, but this doesn't explain why Sol felt he needed to prove this theory. The Virgins and the twins' origins do not appear to be related to Soul's motivation up to this point in the story. Demonstrating to the Jedi that there is a vengeance on Brendok does not absolve Soul of killing Anastasia. It does not implicate May in the murder investigation that was going on, and it in no way keeps Osha safe. It is unclear as to why Soul is trying to prove the Immaculate Conception theory, since it doesn't support his previous goals in the story. 2 times in the courtyard, Soul is asked what he was trying to protect the twins from, and he does not answer. From the flashbacks, we know that he is obedient to his feelings towards Osha, but there is never an explanation as to why he thinks the girls are in danger. The closest we get is May's speech about the ceremony, and Soul saying that the witches don't treat the girls like children, but Soul doesn't elaborate on what he means by that. He's correct, the girls might be in danger of getting dissolved into smoke, but he can't know that. Soul briefly expresses concern about May's ceremonial marking, but he doesn't mention that the witches use the Force to punish the children for disobedience. If it was Soul's primary goal all along in this show to prove a Force vergence, this is a big reveal here in Episode 8 that isn't foreshadowed previously at all. Similar to how May's motivation changes in Episodes 4, 5, and 6, Soul's motivation appears to have changed between Episodes 6 and 8. His focus is no longer on Osha or Kimmer or bringing May to justice or to confessing his crime, but is now proving the existence of the vengeance on Brendok. May doesn't see how this justifies killing Anastasia, and Soul doesn't clear it up for her. Soul's plan also has a hole in it, because he says that Osha and May being alive is the proof of the vengeance, but Osha is not present when he activates his transponder, and he has no reason to think that Osha will arrive on Brendok. As far as he knows, Osha is still on Kofar. Since restraining May on his ship, he has not mentioned Osha, or that, according to his knowledge, she must still be somewhere on the forest planet with Kimmer. The sum of this new knowledge is to undermine what we know of Saul's motivation in favor of this new goal moments before his death. Getting back to the episode. Vernestra and her team of Jedi land on Brendok, and Vernestra immediately senses Kimmer. She remarks out loud,
You're alive.
This is further hinting at Vernestra being Kimmer's old Jedi Master, and confirmation that his helmet blocks Jedi from sensing him, not just reading his mind. As the Jedi set off towards the fortress, Basil links up with them. Back with Osha and May, Kimmer has disappeared. The twins set off to escape, taking May's route from 16 years ago. Vernestra and the Jedi find Soul's body and spread out to search. Osha and May have an emotional moment under the yellow poison tree from Episode 3, reciting their poem. Oh yeah, the poison that she uses in Episode 2 is from this yellow tree. It's quick. I think they only say the name of the tree like one time.
This is Bunta. From my home planet.
The Bunta tree's so beautiful. But Osha, it's dangerous. Only if we eat it.
Kimmer finds them here, and Osha proposes to train with him if he will spare May's life. So he wipes May's memory as a compromise, and the Jedi recover May, who doesn't understand what's going on. On Coruscant, Vernestra questions May and confirms that her memory was wiped, going all the way back to the events of Brendok. Vernestra gives Soul a kind of obituary that describes his character, which is intercut with her discovering Soul's body, burning it, and then also with her statement at the Senate tribunal.
He was my friend. He was a kind, brilliant, compassionate man. And he did a terrible thing.
At the tribunal, Vernestra lies. She pins the events of the whole show on Soul and Soul alone, claiming that Soul killed all the Jedi in the story that are dead in order to cover up what he had done on Brendok. Vernestra tells May that she requires her help in locating a pupil that she had before the pupil turned to evil. Vernestra is presumably referring to Kimmer, and the phrasing is a reference to Obi-Wan's monologue in A New Hope when he talks about Vader.
I need you to help me find someone.
Who?
A pupil of mine. Before he turned to evil.
A Jedi named Darth Vader, who was a pupil of mine until he turned to evil.
Vernestra, as she has been throughout the show, is representative of corruption in the Jedi Order. She lies to the Senate, she blames the events of this story on Sol, and she tries to spare the Jedi from external review and political blowback. This final betrayal of her friend's legacy cements Vernestra's role in the Acolyte as a villainous character, and likely a central villain of the show if there is in fact a season 2. Kimmer and Osha hold hands on Planet Unknown, there is a tease for Yoda, and the season ends. Episode 8 is a mix of payoff and more mystery. Osha and May get their revenge, and Sol finally has to confess to what he's done. There are more mystery and plot threads to be developed later in Kimmer and Vernestra, the creature in the cave in Planet Unknown, Osha's training, what will happen to May, what Yoda's role will be. Character motivations are still muddied. Sol changes his objectives between episodes, Osha agrees to be trained by Kimmer and May, willingly accepts losing her memories of her sister. These actions by Osha, May, and Sol are all in conflict with their motivations that have been set up in the story. Sol wanted justice for his colleagues, and he also wanted to keep Osha safe. Bringing May to Brendok to prove a Force Vergence is something that he decides off-screen between episodes 6 and 8. This doesn't absolve him of killing Anastasia, and has nothing to do with keeping Osha safe. If the intent here is that proving a Force Vergence is somehow Sol's justification for trying to rescue Osha and May in the flashback, that is not clear in the narrative. Even after Sol realizes that it's May on his ship and not Osha, he doesn't make an effort to go back to Kofar to find her. Proving the Vergence becomes his only motivation in the beginning of Episode 8. Again, poor May has actions that are not aligned with her goals. Eventually, May demands a confession from Sol in the courtyard. If a confession is what she wanted from Sol this whole time, there are several opportunities to get one. Sol was unconscious on Kofar. She had the jump on him with a knife on the ship. She had the jump on him again when she tased him. These are all opportunities to extract a confession from Sol, or kill him if this was her goal. If her goal was anything else, it is not present in either May's dialogue or her actions. There is even that moment in episode 6 where Sol is about to confess, and May interrupts him to go and try and contact the Jedi. If her goal is that Sol has to confess to the Jedi Order, she doesn't seem upset when Osha kills him, so I don't know. Osha flip-flops a couple times in this episode as well. She's no longer afraid of Kimmer, who killed her friends, and she goes along with his plan to race to recover May. She gives Kimmer back his lightsaber at some point for reasons unknown. When she has Kimmer on the end of a saber for the second time, knowing that his objective is still to kill May, Osha gets distracted and he escapes. Later, she makes a deal for May's life, agreeing to train with the person that murdered her friends and was going to kill her sister. If Osha's unwillingness to act is motivated by a lingering sense of loyalty to a Jedi code, being trained as a Sith doesn't really go along with that. Osha has had multiple opportunities to kill Kimmer or make an escape with May that she does not take. It would seem that Kimmer's appeal to Osha's sexual desire was effective and is a stronger motivator than keeping May safe. Kimmer has been consistent and gets exactly what he wants in a new pupil, and all the people that could implicate him are dead or memory wiped or are badger hamstery creatures that speak a very uncommon language. Vernestra also knows Kimmer's alive, but she apparently has motivation to keep that quiet, which sets up a primary conflict if this show gets greenlit for a second season. You may have noticed that I obviously read the script before the news dropped that season 2 of The Acolyte is not going to happen. I chose to leave these parts in here because I didn't go back through and try to sound like I knew what I was talking about or sound correct knowing the end of the show. I really did write and record all this stuff as I watched it. Vernestra is also consistent and would appear to get exactly what she wants. The Senate might believe her story about Sol taking scrutiny off of the Jedi Order and placing it on Sol, who is conveniently dead, although we don't see the results of the tribunal. Subjectively, this finale contains some of my favorite moments in the show, coupled with the culmination of my concerns for the character writing. Most of our main characters have flimsy reasons for doing what they are doing, which makes it difficult for me to invest in their climactic emotional moments. Most of the main character dialogue is saying what they want or describing the immediate plot, instead of actions telling us the story. On the other hand, Vernestra's scenes, especially her conversation with the Senator, contain more motivated dialogue than any single other interaction we've seen in the show. Vernestra never tells any characters what she's doing or how she feels, but we get this information by observing her actions and reactions. She plays politics with the Senator, who is giving pretty overt exposition and theme dumping, but Vernestra doesn't give visible reactions when he insults the Jedi, and she works behind the scenes to prevent his inquisition into the Jedi's affairs. We see Vernestra initially shocked to sense Kimmer, but then she has this quick moment where she composes herself and acts on new information. She's fast on her feet. She sends away all the Jedi that she brought to burn Sol's body in private and dispose of the evidence. These actions tell us a lot about Vernestra as a character and her motivations, even if she never has to come out and say them. This is in contrast to everything else that happens in the show that require exposition dumps for the audience's benefit. The lightsaber combat in this show continues to be fast and creative. Sol and Kimmer fight through several locations, and the choreography is still top-notch, on par with what we've seen in many of the main series Star Wars films. I was pretty disappointed to see that Sol's writing has slipped into a ravine for this episode. What he's doing just doesn't add up with what he supposedly wanted, and I don't like that because I enjoyed this character before this. If we just ask a couple of questions, we'll see pretty quickly that in episode 8 alone, Sol is making almost random choices. So what does Sol want? Answer: to prove a Force Vergence was used to create Osha and May. Why does he want this? We don't know. He never says. May even asks him directly why he wants to do this, and he never answers. So what would it change if the Jedi knew about the Force Vergence, which they should know? They sent a team of Jedi here to study one. We don't know. The show doesn't tell us. So how would May, being alive, be proof of this Vergence? Again, it's not clear, especially without Osha present. If the thinking is that Sol could show May to the Jedi and they might believe him about the Vergence, well, so what? A Vergence and Immaculate Conception doesn't absolve anybody of anything, or somehow justify his protecting the twins, so why does that matter? This motivation also ignores previously established information that Sol has access to the blood samples from Osha and May that do kind of prove a Vergence. The strangest part of Sol's new motivation is that the Vergence itself is a non-factor in the story. Indara and Sol mention in episode 7 that a Vergence is a significant thing and should be studied. But that's it. There's no moment where somebody doesn't believe Sol about the Vergence, or some sort of implication that Sol is obsessed with Vergences, or how the Vergence is somehow related to his killing Anastasia. Sol turning into this Vergence conspiracy theorist in the last episode undoes a lot of solid character work for Sol throughout the season. And I know that this motivation is just to get Sol and May back on Brendok for the finale, but it comes at the cost of both characters making no sense in the context of what has been established in this story. Before he has his final confrontation with Anastasia, Sol does ask how the twins were created and he doesn't get an answer. But this doesn't go anywhere. She doesn't bring it up again. He doesn't bring it up again. It's never set up that the way that the twins were created is the impetus for Sol trying to rescue the twins or for being so worried about the Coven. Those things do not appear to be related in the story. Last thing for episode 8. Basil ripping out cables to stop Sol from killing May is ridiculous. If this doesn't bother you, it's fine. I'm not saying you're wrong for liking it. I think it would be better character building for Sol if his first reaction was violence, and then maybe he thinks better of it, because he's reflecting on what happened with Anastasia, or maybe he even does shoot at May, which is why she has to crash land on the planet. Creating a parallel between Sol's actions in the past and Sol's actions in the present. But instead of being a character moment for Sol that links his emotional responses to his violence, this is Deus Ex Rodent. It's a silly, silly moment in a scene where a man is seriously considering murdering a young girl, and for me, this tonal dissonance is not enjoyable. From a perspective of pure narrative construction, Soul's old-ass ship has already been proven multiple times to have power fluctuations and even power failures, so there is no need to have Basil in this scene ripping out cables. If I were to edit this series into a film, which is still a fun project idea, you can edit Basil out of this scene completely and nothing changes and the continuity is preserved because they already set up that the old ship has power problems. Actually, now that I mention it, I'm pretty sure you could omit Basil from the show entirely, since it didn't end up mattering that Kilnaka's hut was really remote, and there are other functions in the story that do all the things that he was there to do. So, I don't know why he's here, really. Let's go over the main points of this show that I have brought up time and time again across these episodes. The Acolyte is well constructed in the development of certain themes, and novel ideas for the Star Wars canon are present here, but this analysis has also revealed that the show is lacking in the areas of narrative structure, pacing, and character writing. Structure. Season 1 of The Acolyte is a series of mysteries and reveals. The show has a narrative structure of asking and then answering questions similar to what we might see in a thriller or mystery movie. Some of these questions persist through the end of the season, but some of them are answered right away. These short-term mysteries are how the show is attempting to create tension and engagement from episode to episode. Episode 1 asks, is this Osha person really a killer? This is answered in Episode 1, no, she isn't, but her sister is. Episode 2 asks, who is the Sith Master? This question is answered in Episode 5. Episode 3 asks, what really happened on Brendok 16 years ago? Answered in Episode 7, and I think you see the pattern. I spoke about this earlier in the analysis, but it can be risky to structure a story in this way because it relies on the audience not guessing the reveals to retain tension. The Acolyte is not built around character conflict or their actions. Instead, it is a slow drip of information that attempts to keep audience engagement by never allowing the audience to know the full story. In a conventional mystery narrative, we might see one central question ground this story, and then amplifying information is revealed slowly to the audience until the end when we finally understand the entire thing. The Acolyte is not grounded by one mystery, but attempts to have several competing mysteries that do not always tie into each other. Questions are asked and answered, or in some cases, sidelined, that do not support a core theme or plot or character. For example, the identity of Kimmer has nothing to do with the truth of what happened on Brendok. The mystery of Osha's failure to become a Jedi has nothing to do with her relationship to Soul, or to Kimmer, or to May. The true nature of Osha and May's conception is a seed planted in Episode 3, but it doesn't relate to anything and it doesn't go anywhere. Structuring the season as a series of small reveals that don't pertain to a central conflict makes the Acolyte more structurally similar to episodic programming, where the characters encounter a new villain or problem every week, then a story with a definitive beginning and end point. When people make fun of mystery box-style storytelling popularized by J.J. Abrams and his writing team, this is a pretty good example of what they mean. This story is a box full of what appear to be compelling questions, but once those questions start to have answers, we see that our investment in the narrative was not based on the conflicts or the characters, but on the show concealing information from us. A central conflict or mystery would give this season a flow, a progression that each episode builds on, instead of plot cul-de-sacs that are divorced from the main narrative that the show currently has. The mystery that is most nearly a central conflict that you could structure this around would be what Soul did on Brendok, which they tease in Episode 3 and reveal in Episode 7. Establishing this mystery earlier and resolving it later, and then tying every other character's plot points into that central mystery, would allow the season to follow a more conventional mystery-style story. I won't say definitively Leslie Headland was trying to tell a conventional mystery and failed, but because this show wears so many of the trappings of mystery stories, It is a reasonable assumption to say that this is something they were going for and fell short of achieving. If this is not the case, and the mysteries are just set dressing, then I guess disregard this point. Perhaps it is due to the disconnected nature of some of these mysteries that there are several plot elements here that don't get payoff or do not contribute to the end state for the characters. For example, Saul is well established to read minds beyond the normal Jedi capacity to sense feelings. Kimmer gives an explanation about his own ability to intuit a person's thoughts based on how he can sense they feel, but Saul is able to pull wholly original information out of a person's mind. This is established in Episode 2 and alluded to in Episode 5. Saul's unique ability to read minds never has payoff in the story and is not mentioned again after Episode 5, despite multiple opportunities to solve problems with it. Saul could have read May's mind in Episode 6 to determine her identity. He could have read Anasea's mind in Episode 7 to assess her intentions. He could have read Kimmer's mind when Kimmer's helmet was removed to learn what Kimmer's motives are instead of asking him. May provides a possible explanation as to why Saul is not using this ability consistently, but if this explanation is true, why keep this element in the story if its entire purpose is to be subverted? You could have Saul not have this ability, and nothing would change. Another self-contained mystery is the reveal that Osha and May were immaculately conceived. This information does not contribute to the plot of the Acolyte because it does not determine the behavior for any of the characters. Saul does not tell Osha or May their true nature until his final moments, opting to keep it to himself for 16 years. The twins do not do anything because of this information. They learn it from Saul, but they never talk about it or bring it up. If the intent for Saul was that he wanted to prove a Force virgins all along, it's not set up in the story prior to this, but I'll talk about that more in the character motivation section. Where the virgins may have affected a character's behavior is in Torben, who sets off to capture the twins in Episode 7 to prove a virgin so he can leave Brandok, but it is not explained how the physical capturing of the children will prove a Force virgins beyond what the blood samples he has already taken will prove, or why he would be allowed to leave Brandok if they do find a Force virgins. The twins literally being the same person is not used to develop the narrative, but is instead intended to have thematic significance. Osha and May see their past from different perspectives in the Rashomon theme that we talked about earlier. They end up switching sides, wearing each other's clothes, and helping the Sith and Jedi respectively. It is not really clear to me what this story is intending to say with this, outside of good and evil maybe being two sides of the same coin, and how perspective can shape our personalities. The insistence from Kimmer that May must kill a Jedi without a weapon never receives further clarification and is abandoned in the story. When Osha kills Saul in the end with the Force, it is implied that she has surpassed May, but there's never a deeper reason explored as to why it is important to Kimmer that May kills without a weapon, or what it means that Osha is able to. Also, she doesn't not use a weapon, she uses the Force. These elements are not plot holes. More nearly, they are examples of Chekhov's gun, a narrative principle that states that every element should be necessary in the plot. Saul's mind reading, immaculate conception, the rule about killing an unarmed Jedi, are just several elements in this show that could be omitted entirely without changing the outcome of the story at all. Now let's talk specifically about the literal structure of the episodes in this show, specifically the length and content. The streaming series format lets this narrative down because it doesn't allow enough time for the episodes to tell complete parts of the story. Due in part to the length, most episodes cannot accommodate character building and also plot essential action. Only episodes 1, 2, 5, and 8 have action and also advance the plot. Episodes 3, 4, 6, and 7 are all flashback or entirely dialogue, and almost nothing plot essential is developed there. Episode 7 even being shot-for-shot identical to Episode 3 in some parts. The exception would be the climax of Episode 7, where we do learn important information about the backstory of some of these characters. Alternating between an action-heavy episode and a dialogue-heavy episode contributes to what could be viewed as a pacing issue for the series. Maybe this is Disney's fault and not Leslie Headland's, but the outcome is the same for the viewer. This series, similar to Kenobi, was likely a film script that was stretched to accommodate a streaming format, so we get whole episodes of characters walking through the forest, duplicating scenes, and meat gazing. Episodes 3, 4, 6, and 7 could be parsed down into their key moments, and those moments slotted into the remaining episodes if only those episodes were allowed to be longer. The content of this story could be edited down into a 2-ish hour movie format without losing significant plot or character developments. Maybe I will do this as a side project after this, but it would take me a really long time. Since we're here, let's talk about pacing. Pacing in a story is difficult to assess objectively, since every person has a different tolerance for how predictable or unpredictable a story is or should be. Something I personally find surprising, you might find boring and tropey, and neither of us are really wrong. The show drops many hints that Soul did something horrible in episodes 4, 5, and 6. I cannot say objectively if this mystery was stretched too far. While certainly able to be predicted, only you can decide if the reveals in episode 7 were too predictable. The mystery about what Soul did was written to last 4 episodes. 2 episodes just prolong the runtime of the show in between action set pieces and big reveals. Episodes 4 and 6 are exclusively dialogue, don't advance the plot, and do not contribute to the reveal that Soul killed Mother Anasea. Because of this, it is very likely that criticisms of the pacing in The Acolyte will focus on the content and placement of episodes 3, 4, 6, and 7. Thematic development. Several themes are developed and presented thoroughly. Primarily that the Jedi Order is corrupting and corrupted. Soul's character is representative of the adage, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Soul's journey is that he was too kind for his own good and convinced to cover up his crimes in the name of that kindness by his superior. Soul's character was effective in demonstrating this theme until he was revealed to be more overtly predatory in episode 7 and then inconsistently motivated in episode 8. Vernestra, as I have said the whole time, embodies corruption in the Jedi. Vernestra coerces her peers to lie on her behalf. She plays politics with the Senator, she actively destroys evidence, and she lies to avoid external review of the Jedi. She is not portrayed as being especially competent in these cover-ups. Vernestra accidentally reveals to the Senator that there were multiple Jedi casualties on Kofar, which invites further probing from the Senator. Multiple times, Vernestra is described as having a low tolerance for hyperspace travel, possibly in an attempt to make her seem fragile, although we never see this sickness for ourselves. Vernestra's final act is to pin numerous murders on Soul, in her mind closing the case, although it remains to be seen if this strategy was effective in preventing external review of the Jedi. It is possible that Vernestra is committed to covering up any perceived incompetencies from the Jedi because she recognizes the description of Kimmer's fighting style and doesn't want to be implicated in trying to kill him. It is also possible, however, that cover-ups are just her modus operandi, since she is convincing Soul to lie for her well before she knows that Kimmer is alive. We might interpret that Vernestra, her attempts to conceal the truth, her attitude towards her fellow Jedi, losing her Padawan to the dark side, lying to the Senate, and her hyperspace illness are all ways that the writing is being critical of the Jedi and their structure of power in the Star Wars universe. Media concerned with the deconstruction of power structures as a theme are usually allegorical to certain real-life organizations, but as I said, this analysis is not about the personal politics of Leslie Headland, and I don't want this video to spiral out into guessing at possible allegory or metaphor. There's enough in here as it is without me taking guesses. While it is tempting to say that a theme of The Acolyte is the dynamic between students and teachers and how that relation can become corrupted, this is only really present in dialogue and it's never shown in any actions. We do not see how Soul acted as a mentor to Osha, even though they do reference it in dialogue. We do not see how Kimmer taught May, which is only referenced in one line from Kimmer. We do not see what happened with Vernestra and Kimmer, although again, this is alluded to a little bit in dialogue. We do get to see how Anasea and Mother Coral treated the twins when they were young, but these moments are not used as comparison or juxtaposed with the Jedi's treatment of children. And now for the longest section of the summary, character writing. Characters' personalities, backgrounds, and motivations are told to us in dialogue, but rarely demonstrated in actions. Yord explaining Osha's backstory to Osha, Jekyllon explaining Osha's inner turmoil to Osha, Sol describing his shortcomings as a mentor to Osha, May stating her motivations for abandoning her revenge quest, Kimmer telling Sol his desire for a pupil, Sol explaining his affection for Osha, Sol explaining how Osha is competent with the stun gun, etc. These are just a few instances where character information is being told to the audience, but not shown. It is a well-known convention that for compelling writing, a character should be shown to act in accordance with their personality, and if possible, to take motivated actions that convey information rather than have that information explained for the audience's benefit. It can create a dissonance between the audience and the immersion of the story when exposition takes priority over action. This guideline is usually called some variation of telling versus showing. I won't go into every example of telling over showing in The Acolyte. Suffice it to say, the writing relies heavily on characters explaining things to each other to convey information. While not reasonably arguable that the writing here relies on exposition to communicate ideas and characters, it is not a firm rule that stories must be written in any specific way, and your personal enjoyment of exposition may vary. The danger in using expository dialogue too much is that the plot and characters might become flat informational robots who do not act similarly to real people, which can hinder an audience's investment in the characters and by extension their investment in the story. Getting to specific characters in The Acolyte, the characters are often vaguely motivated and their actions often do not support their goals. Conflicts between a character's stated goals and their actions can make those characters inconsistent or give the impression that their motivations didn't matter or weren't important to the story. This is not the same thing as a character trying something and failing. Several side characters are developed through a combination of exposition and action and are mostly consistent. Yord is uptight and kind of a Boy Scout. Jekyllon is empathetic and a capable fighter. Indara is patient, non-confrontational, and values emotional well-being and teaching over honesty. Vernestra is corrupt, condescending, and insecure. Kimmer is brought to life in his physicality, fighting style, and lines like, "Was that its name?" The choice to characterize Yord and Jekyllon just to have Kimmer kill them efficiently characterizes Kimmer as being callous and brutal in just one fight scene. Sol is caring, impulsive, emotive, and sympathetic up through episode 7, where he is more predatory. In episode 8, Sol's motivation changes completely. No longer concerned with Osha's survival, Sol becomes obsessed with proving the Force Virgins on Brendok and says that he needs May to do this. It is a significant shift in Sol's character to no longer care about Osha's safety, since this has been his only stated motivation for the last 16 years. Until that last bit about Sol, those are all good examples of how the show is using a character's actions or demeanor or reactions or fighting style or line delivery to communicate personality for those characters. All of this, though, is small potatoes compared to the way May and Osha are written and characterized. I could not tell you one trait or goal specific to either character that remains true through the season. They are not motivated, having to be dragged from scene to scene by Yord, Sol, and Kimmer, May's desires and goals changing along the way. Neither May nor Osha ever make a decision or take an action that pushes the story forward. It is always the intervention of Sol or Kimmer that propel us from scene to scene. May flip-flops her motivation so many times that it is difficult to say what she wants or intends to do in episodes 4 through 8. Osha watches her friends get straight up murdered and willingly accompanies their murderer to Brendok despite his stated goal being to murder her sister. In this instance, Osha is the one with the lightsaber and the only one who knows where to go and has unfettered access to his ship. She is established to live by the Jedi Code to some extent, so killing Kimmer is off the table, but allowing Kimmer to go with her is baffling, even given what little we do know about Osha. If we had to extrapolate out Osha's personality from episode 6, it would be fair to say that she doesn't care very much if May lives or dies, and her decision-making is entirely governed by her sexual desire. Similar to the way Soul's motivation is changed to get Soul and May back onto Brendock, Osha allowing Kimmer to accompany her undermines Osha's affection for Soul, May, Yord, and Jackie Lon. The sum of these inconsistencies in Osha, May, and Soul is a potential disconnect in how we relate to these characters. We cannot thoroughly understand their motivations, predict their next actions, or relate to their perspectives unless we as the audience start to theory craft and invent our own explanations. To engage with this narrative on its terms, let's try a different perspective real quick. Just by looking at the events of the plot and who it affects the most, we could make a strong case that Soul is actually the protagonist here. Soul is the character with a lesson to be learned. He wants to be honest, but he is the one with a personal relationship to the two Jedi that encourage him to lie. Soul remarks on the nobility of their mission to Brendock. He claims confidently that Jedi do not take children. He blames Osha's failure to become a Jedi on himself. He mentors younglings. He takes personal responsibility for recovering Osha. He is the driver and decider in getting to the bottom of the mystery of Indara's murder. He lives by the Jedi code of not using weapons against unarmed opponents, except for that poor beetle that he slaughtered. Soul even volunteers to go to the High Council after Brendock. He wants to tell the truth and face the consequences, but he is talked into lying for Osha's sake, Indara exploiting his sympathy. Soul is, until Episode 7, an ideal Jedi, embodying goodness of the Order in his thoughts and actions. His character summed up effectively by Vernestra's epitaph in the end, a brilliant and kind man who did a terrible thing. Even though he was pretty justified in what he did, I understand where she's coming from. Soul is also highly motivated to make amends for the events of Brendock and protect Osha, and his actions with these goals in mind are consistently pushing the narrative forward. If we wanted to put this into snobby film terms, Soul wants to be a good Jedi, but he needs to confront his dark past. Until Episode 7, Soul is a really good character, both in the literal sense of being a good person with a high amount of goodness, but also in the sense that he is thoroughly developed and his motivations are clear and integral to the plot of the show. So I lied in the beginning when I said there wouldn't be elements referred to as good or bad, but I had to do it here for the double meaning. All of this is complementary to Soul's character writing, but not to the Acolyte as a whole. Osha and May are still being framed as the characters with things to do and learn, but their journeys in this story are completely usurped by Soul's, who has more at stake, propels the story, and is more thoroughly characterized. Now, it's not a hard and fast rule that the protagonist of the story is also the main character. Mad Max Fury Road is a great example of the two being different. Max is the main character because we experience the story from his perspective. But Furiosa is the protagonist. Her actions move the story, and she is the one with the stakes in the plot. Furiosa comes up with the plan to free the wives, escape the tyranny of Immortan Joe, return to her childhood home, and eventually come back to take her revenge. Comparatively, Max has very little going on. He just wants to survive and get out of the movie. In this same fashion, Osha, more so than May, is our main character, and Soul could be viewed as the protagonist. The misstep in The Acolyte is placing so much emphasis on Osha and May, which gives sharp focus to their sparse characterization and their absent or wobbly motivations. The scenes of Osha and May alone or together without side characters around are very similar to the scenes in Mad Max of Max by himself. The scene treads water until somebody else comes along to set the plot in motion. These main characters are very much along for the ride. Examples like Under the Tree in Episode 3 where they get bailed out by Coral, Under the Tree in Episode 8 getting bailed out by Kimmer, In the Room in Episode 8 saved by a ship distraction, in the end of Episode 5 where they have to be saved by Kimmer and Soul. If there is an objective shortcoming in this show that fans and haters alike are most likely to agree on, it's that the characterization of Osha and May is not strong or distinct. The objectivity in this video so far has been built around inferring or discerning the creator's intent for her work, based on the creative choices made in the show. Fortunately for me, the creator has actually given a number of interviews that might give us some valuable insight as to the intent for the Acolyte, so we can precisely say what exactly Leslie Headland actually wanted. I'm not going to turn this into an examination of Headland's personal politics or anything. If you are curious about the nihilistic implications of an absent morality of the show, I highly recommend 2 videos. The first is an analysis from Little Platoon, which is incredibly thorough, and in the end focuses on Headland's personal beliefs and their implications for how the Acolyte story is told. The other video is from a creator named K.M. Carter. She does an analysis through a more feminine lens, and specifically about how Headland is wrestling with morality and perspective by employing the Rashomon narrative. It's a great analytical video that I really enjoyed. Extrapolating a person's beliefs from a series of interviews about a TV show, I don't feel is in spirit with an objective analysis, so I won't be including that stuff here. But it is out there if you're curious. For this video, I am only interested in the statements that Headland has made that give definitive answers as to her intent with this story, or any thematic connections that she believes are present. So let's take a look at the interview circuit to see if the show Headland tried to make is the same as the show that we got. The first is an interview with the YouTube channel The Mary Sue. Headland says, "The central mystery of the show is about Osha and May's relationship and their relationship to Soul." Headland remarks that the mystery about Kimmer isn't very important, and what mattered to her was the character design. This is almost exactly what I said regarding the structure of the show and how it is a series of contained mysteries, the payoff of which is not always related to an overall story or any central mystery. So the show very much supports part of what Headland is saying here, and we can objectively say that the show was successful if the goal was portraying mysteries and payoffs that do not pertain to an overarching narrative. As we talked about much earlier, the mystery of what Soul did on Brendock is the most central mystery, although to call it that is sort of misleading, because it does not affect everyone in the story, and the mystery is all but resolved as early as episode 3. But Headland did not say that the central mystery is what happened on Brendock. She said that the central mystery was Osha and May's relationship and their relationship to Soul. I cannot be fully certain what she means by this, since their relationship itself is not a mystery in any sense. I'm pretty sure she means that the context of their relationship is the mystery, specifically what happened on Brendock. I'm going to do this a couple times where I cut Headland a little bit of slack because this is an interview between people that seem very friendly, and if you held me accountable for everything I said offhand in a conversation with a friend, I would look like a moron. So I'm not going to pretend that everything Leslie Headland said in an interview is supposed to be taken as gospel. I'm just trying to gain some insight into her thought process. At 1930, Headland talks about how the Jedi in the High Republic era are different from what we're used to seeing, and that Kimmer represents a counterculture to that. Headland refers to the Jedi operating in this series in a more authoritarian way than we are used to seeing. In the show, Anastasia and Kimmer have dialogue that implies that the Jedi are somehow deciding who does and who does not get to use the Force, but the Jedi take no actions in this show to demonstrate what that means. At 19 minutes, Headland talks about how the Jedi recruit children and how Force users other than the Jedi might not agree with the Jedi taking their children. This statement about a mixed tone for the Jedi is communicated in the show by how the witches feel about the Jedi taking children to train, and Headland's desire to show a more contentious process of education for a young Jedi is supposed to be shown via Osha. This is not on screen in The Acolyte. Osha's difficult Jedi training is referred to in dialogue, but obviously never shown. Headland then posits that Osha being taken from the witches could be the precedent as to why the Jedi don't recruit past a certain age. This is simply not accurate. Even in this show, Soul refers to those rules while speaking to Osha about her training, which confirms that the Jedi training age restriction predates the events of Brendock.
You were too old to train.
At 23:15, Headland expresses an interest in the phrasing in A New Hope that Vader was seduced by the dark side of the Force. She says that the dark side represents seduction and appealing to what a person wants most. In The Acolyte, for Osha, as we have seen, this is a sexual desire that she wants most, which draws a correlation between the notion of being seduced by the dark side and being literally sexually seduced. At 28, Headland talks about how the events of Brendock are not the important part of the mystery. Quote, "We know they did something. We already know that. The question is how. What happened?" Unquote. The analysis very much agrees with this statement, and I think I said what she's saying here almost verbatim like an hour ago. As it is, there's no real mystery as to what happened at the Coven, only how exactly it happened. At the 8-minute mark, Headland talks about how the child actresses that she used were deliberately not identical. She thought it would be easier to create a distinct tone for each sister if the twins did not look exactly alike. This isn't a particularly important note, but I did bring up that the child actor twins were not identical, and now we have a reason. It actually wasn't a budget constraint, it was a deliberate choice from Leslie Headland. In this interview with Collider, Headland delivers a succinct summary of Osha's character. Quote, "So, in my opinion, Osha is extremely in denial about her own anger at the Jedi and at her father, i.e. Sol. She's in extreme denial about that because she feels like she's not allowed to be angry, and she's in an enormous amount of pain over her sister and their history, and she also feels like she's not allowed to feel that. So someone coming in and saying, actually, feeling all those things is not only okay, but actually could restore your spiritual foundation, is almost too much. I don't think that's manipulation. I think he's telling her the truth. When he says semantics, I think he means it. He's just like, why wouldn't you use what is obviously the part of you that needs to be explored the most? Why wouldn't you lean into that? And why would you suppress it for really no reason? The Jedi threw you away, so what are we still doing? What is this thing that you're thinking? You don't owe them anything. You owe yourself to start living your life and recognize your own strength in the Force." Unquote. This character sheet is somewhat supported in the show. Osha's dark past and emotional state, and being unable to open up about that, is revealed in the way that side characters clarify her emotions for the audience. Osha's extreme denial is not present in the show until episode 6, and to call her outburst an expression of her suppressed anger she's been holding on to since she was a child is a bit of a leap, given the lack of context for Osha's emotional state leading up to episode 6, and the apparently deliberate reticence from Osha throughout the show. The show could have made this arc for Osha more clear by saying some of what Headland is saying here as actual dialogue. Kimmer does not say any of these things. There is no correlation drawn between the Jedi suppressing their emotions and Osha not being allowed to process her feelings. If this was present in the show, it would draw comparison to Senator Rayencourt's speech to Vernestra and go a long way towards materializing as a coherent theme, but his speech and Osha's outburst are both pretty much at the end of the story and kept pretty far apart in the narrative. While the show doesn't fully support what Leslie is saying here, the concept, in my opinion, is very interesting as a potential theme and a direction for the character of Osha. I'm not going to go through everything Leslie Headland said in the interview circuit. Suffice it to say that there are things in here that Headland mentions that I didn't notice or didn't talk about. Some examples would be the color theory in how the witches are dressed in purple, or how Kimmer speaks to Osha in soft tones and wears more flowing and feminine clothing than her in episode 6, which suggests a change in their roles since Osha is now the one holding the lightsaber. Headland mentions this specifically. I didn't notice that at all. Some of what Headland is saying about her story and her characters is true per the analysis and observations, but some of it is not. Since we're trying to be objective in analyzing the Acolyte's success in communicating the intent of the creator, I would broadly say that the show fails more than it succeeds, but there are successes to be found here. Subjectively, after spending so much time writing about and thinking about the Acolyte, it's honestly difficult for me to feel strongly one way or the other. I know this analysis has probably sounded overwhelmingly negative, and I absolutely did not enjoy this show, but there are ideas in this story that I enjoy and I wish received more attention. Manny Jacinto's performance, presentation, and fighting style are all top-notch, at least in terms of the Star Wars universe. It shows guts on the part of the writers to characterize side characters only to slaughter them for effect, and I respect that. I find the Witch Coven or the Night Sisters or whatever they are to be an interesting idea. Combining visual allusions to pagan rituals and black magic with the Force is a neat concept, and Jodie Turner-Smith is great. She nails the sensitive but dangerous matriarch thing. It would have been much more interesting to me to see the origins of the Night Sisters and how exactly they were driven from the civilized galaxy and why. Making the Jedi Order into a morally gray organization has potential, but we don't really see this idea explored. The Acolyte's execution simply doesn't live up to these ideas. In my experience, I don't find staying power in a story for the mystery or the special effects or the neato concepts. For me, characters, their struggles, and my empathy with them are what make meaningful stories, and I didn't find that here. If you came to this analysis looking for more reasons to hate the Acolyte, maybe you found some, but it was never my intention to lump more vitriol on the already steaming pile that exists online. If you came here hoping to be vindicated in your love for this show, I'm sorry to have disappointed you. We can all like things for any reason, and there's a lot in this show to like if you care to prioritize casting, action direction, or theme over narrative construction and character writing. Art does not have to be objectively good for us to enjoy it, or to connect with it on a human level, and if The Acolyte is your favorite show of all time, I'm glad that you found something to feel that strongly about, and I wish I could meet you there. If you despise the show, I have some sympathy, and I hope that the overwhelmingly negative response to this series has at least provided you with some kind of catharsis in solidarity. After reading Leslie Headland's description of Osha's character, the word that comes to mind about this show is disappointing. Headland has it all in her head. She knows the lore, she loves these characters, and she has a clear vision for how this story was supposed to fit together and how it is informed by the emotions of those characters. It's just disappointing to me that she was unable to effectively bring that vision to the screen. I look at Headland's character synopsis of Osha and I'm genuinely confused, because it's a beautiful summary of a character that we just don't get in the show. Osha does not remotely behave like the person Headland is describing. Osha does not act like she is consumed by repressed anger and an internalized failure or struggling with a deep trauma caused by her sister. If Osha's character was behaving in accordance with those emotions, then I think this show would really have something. Headland, in my opinion, does not deserve much of the shit that's been slung at her. For a hypothetical season 2, I would be happy to see her as a more big ideas kind of person. More of a producer role, or maybe a co-showrunner, because listening to her talk about this story, she obviously cares a whole lot about Star Wars, and I respect that. It would probably be better for a hypothetical season 2 if Headland allowed other writers to step in and handle things like dialogue and narrative construction and purposeful action, and she stuck to handling the big picture ideas and character sheets. My hope for this video is that we are able to discuss hot topics like this without resorting to unkindness towards each other or to the creators. I know Star Wars is a passion for so many people, but lots of those people worked really hard on this show. We owe it to each other and our fellow fans to present well-reasoned arguments for and against the quality of the art, and I personally enjoy a spirited debate over how we interpret these stories. Kumbaya and all that shit. So if you enjoyed this analysis or particularly hated it, I am open to feedback, good or bad. Thank you.